All right, I'd like a motion to move into, to return to open session.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Let's see, whoops, lost my agenda, there we go. Public appearances. Are there any public appearances? Thank you. Item F, the consent agenda. I'd like approval of, motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, which consists of solely of the minutes of the October 28th meeting. Somebody please move approval.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item G, recognitions.
Okay, I know we have a couple of principals that have some recognitions they'd like to make tonight. Mr. Foster?
I'll go first.
Okay.
There's a lot of recognitions from Connersville School Board. Keep it free tonight, just so we carry on with the agenda. First off, I want to recognize the third grade staff, be Nancy Casto, Mark Esch, Amy Strengthsling, Nancy Evans, Nancy Evans, Lisa Emmons, Bridget Lawler, and Jenny Curry for organizing the food pantry drive. They brought 996 items to the Cottage Grove Food Pantry on Monday. They walked them down there and delivered them, so that was definitely needs recognition. Our fall parent-teacher conference attendance has crept up to 97% of families. What I think why we should recognize that, it was at about 93 after the 2 nights. And what the teachers have been doing is reaching out to the families that couldn't make it, rescheduling and getting an opportunity to make that connection. So we really tried, we're shooting for 100%, but I think, you know, when you start getting those little small percentage increases at the end, that just shows what kind of teachers we have at Cottage Grove School to go that extra mile. And then the last thing I would like to recognize is Amy Strengthsling's organized a veteran holiday card project. So all of our students are working on creating holiday cards that then we'll give to the local American Legion rep that'll come out and they'll deliver them to the veteran hospital here in town, and then just through some people to the local Legion.
I have 2 from the high school. One is last night we celebrated our 10th annual academic awards. Nicole Hafley and Nicole North Hester began the program 10 years ago. And last night we celebrated academic success for 250 students. And Dr. Brost gave a nice speech on leadership and recognition. And then the second thing that we would like to share is we had 4 students sign letters of intent today. One was Michaela Hulk. She signed with Eastern Kentucky University for women's golf. Autumn Ogden signed with North Dakota State University for women's basketball. Kelsey Stinson, University of Minnesota Crookston, basketball. And Kaylee Hinson, California Baptist, also women's basketball.
Okay.
Oh,
good. Susan?
We also had the girls' high school swim team placed 5th place at sectional, and the fun stuff really is some of the individuals did just extremely well. Nikki Benedict was 2nd in dive and qualified for state. They go this Friday. We had 3 relays and 4 individuals on the girls' swim team that are going to state, including Cassandra Keller, Lauren Christensen, Jennifer Keller, Grace Storms, whose mother coached many of our kids to lots of medals and awards. Wendy Pfefferkorn and Rebecca Menenga. I don't think I missed anybody. And they're going in a variety of events, some as individuals and some in relays. And then we had a whole group of high school students who received awards at the Model UN. Brooke DeCora, Carter Faust, Dylan DeGroot, Danny LeMay, Hogan Besrat, Sophia Keel, Mason Spanham, Lauren Hayden, Andrew Zoll, and Emma Cooper. And I apologize if I missed anybody. I wasn't there seeing everything, but these were just a couple of things that I picked up for kids that are doing well. And the other interesting thing, again, that comes up as you see about the swim team, Madison has been doing a lot of research about, again, the relationship between we know extracurriculars, period, but specifically, they've been doing the research on sports, and that improves some academic achievement, but specifically decreases absenteeism. So those are all good things.
Good. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, correspondence and announcements.
None tonight?
Have we got everything? Then item I, administrative reports. Starting with Dan.
I was wondering if we could flip the order and do our student services report first. Krista has a long drive ahead of her tonight to get to a conference.
Sure, of course.
So Krista McCumber will be presenting data on 2 reports. These reports, you can see the memos that are in your board packet, and these are annual reports that we're required to give to the board, one statutorily and the other by policy. And I'll let Krista take it away from there.
Okay, great. So these formats are similar to previous years, but we'll start with seclusion and restraint. It's a board policy requirement and a legal requirement to report out on the number of incidents of seclusion and restraint each year. So the policy references each principal as the data reporter, so that's why we're required to break it out by building. So you will see below, so I'll kind of just pull up the chart and talk about it a little bit. Each building, and then these are the recorded number of incidents of seclusion or restraint. And it also indicates how many of those students were students with disabilities. So I think just to walk through, it's important to look at the total incidents, but then also the number of students involved. So you can see each building has a total incident of students with disabilities. So at the high school, there are 2 incidents, and both incidents involved a student with a disability. 1 student was involved. Glacial Drumlin didn't have any reported incidents last year. Cottage Grove had a few. Winnequa and Taylor Prairie. And you can see our totals for the year. So I think just to summarize, seclusion and restraint are obviously prohibited except in incidents where there is an imminent danger to self or others, physical danger. Same with seclusion. We're always using a continuum of other positive interventions prior to the use of seclusion or restraint. I think the point that I wanted to just sort of focus on was, as a district, we really focused on nonviolent physical crisis intervention, as well as nonviolent crisis intervention as a program. So our focus has been on prevention, and we have a really large number of staff members over time that we have been able to get trained, which is nice, because that means in the building, each building has a large team of crisis trained staff members that can be available to problem solve in times of crisis, as well as to provide the physical restraint if necessary. The training itself, as a trainer, I can kind of speak to that a little bit. The focus really is on overall prevention, verbal de-escalation, a continuum of supports, setting limits, all things that we'd like to do prior to ever needing to use seclusion or restraint. So having, taken a look and reviewed all of the reports, we do a really nice job of being accurate with our data, I think, as far as making sure that when we are actually using seclusion or physically preventing a student from leaving a space, it's recorded, and the duration is recorded, and that's reported out to parents. The crisis teams in the buildings during the trainings have a lot of time to debrief and work with each other and sort of problem solve about how to improve on the process, and also to think about alternative responses to seclusion and restraint. So those are the ongoing conversations that we have. One thing to note is that incidents involving law enforcement are not required. They don't fall under Act 125, so they are required for notification and reporting purposes in a little bit different vein. But the same requirements about training and physical restraint, the type of physical restraint that can be used, is different. Yeah, so we want to take some questions on this particular part first. And
Dean?
If you look down at Winnequa and Taylor Prairie School and compare that to the other schools, it seems to me it looks like the great proportion of them are students with some disability.
Yes.
And but What happens after your little kids with a disability has a big kid's disability? What happens in that gap?
So good point, good question. I think that people, can notice the trend in the data. The actual reality is the ability to intervene physically with students at the middle and high school level just becomes not much of an option. Kids are bigger, they're stronger. We have to use more of a continuum of supports. We do have the liaison officer available at the older grade levels too. I think also it's a learning experience when kids are younger, so they're learning alternatives to their behaviors. So that's part of the picture as well. It's why it's typical to see a lot more incidents of seclusion and restraint as students are younger.
Are the ones at Winnequa School of roughly the same age as the ones at Taylor Prairie?
There's a range, and certainly we do see larger numbers of students at the younger grade levels, and then as students become older, it's fewer and fewer numbers of students that are involved in the incident. So one student with or without a disability might be responsible for a large number of incidents that could be older than.
Does this mean you're successful early on?
That's the goal, right?
Or is it a maturation issue?
I think there are a lot of factors that play into it. Kids grow up, they outgrow some behaviors and replace them with other behaviors that their behavior plans need to address. But I do think the physical acting out, you do see even between, for example, Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove schools, some kids find alternatives to those behaviors. Behavior plans have or have a longer duration of time to be in place, and staff get to know the students as well and are able to implement some strategies, I think. And Connie can also add to that as well.
I think too, at our age, sometimes some children's mental health issues are not diagnosed until a little bit later, and so sometimes we're dealing with kids that are working through some mental health, and until they get the proper treatment, whether it be counseling or medication, we might be experiencing some different challenges.
And is there's no ethnicity or race ethnicity issues reported? Is that required?
It's not required to be reported. Only students with disabilities is a specific requirement. And then along those lines, the bullying and harassment report, to do that on the same occasion is helpful, because I think a lot of the strategies we use to prevent seclusion and restraint are similar to those universally that are in place to address, or more importantly, to prevent issues of bullying and harassment. So just the definitions of bullying and harassment are included in here. The data in this chart here show the number of incidents of bullying and harassment as indicated, and we have to use our data from Infinite Campus, so how we code and report data is something we continually are monitoring. I also included in the same data set the number of bullying incidents that are reported via our online portal, and I know that you discussed that in the past, and there are certainly some flaws with online self-reporting data, but I think it's good to have a handle on, is this something that's being utilized, where and how often, and so it's just part of the data set. So you can see the number of bullying incidents at the various buildings, as well as harassment, and those are incidents from Infinite Campus, as well as the number of bullying incidents reported via the online portal. That is a variety in terms of who is the reporter. The vast majority are reported by students themselves. There are a few parent reports in the data set from last year as well. And then just to sort of give us a summary of what we're doing as a district and how we're supporting efforts to prevent bullying and harassment. A lot of these are similar, but the ongoing coaching and support that we've provided for positive behavior intervention and support, or PBIS. We're still doing some tailored coaching, supporting a lot of professional development for PBIS coaches as well as other staff, providing some district support to building teams. Restorative justice and the circle training has continued and has been expanded this year, particularly into the high school as well as continuing in the middle school. Just ongoing professional development designed to, identify potential sources of behavior problems as well as help kids to build connections and community. We are in year 2 of the developmental guidance review process. The team has gone through and looked at identified gaps and identified strengths of the second step curriculum that we use, which is really focused on. It's an anti-violence, anti-bullying curriculum. We've purchased specific units that deal with bullying at the various age levels, and as well as looking at gaps in terms of units designed to promote equity and teach students to learn more about one another and different things like that that will ultimately result in less bullying and harassment. The nonviolent crisis intervention training, I think, applies here as well. We have a lot of overlap between that training and what we're doing just more universally for students. Any questions?
Susan?
I guess I'm just still looking for more clarity here on these reports. So when we wrote the policy, we actually asked to make, so that for sure, as a board, we all agreed that we wanted to hear about this every year. So I'm still trying to kind of wrap my arms around what this means. The other thing is, in the historical data from 2013-14,
Yes.
total 87, what does that number compare to? And
So-
then what does, so I have number of bullying incidents. Does that compare to the bullying
So those are
incidents?
bullying incidences
So maybe
that were
we should
reported out separately.
Do a report out that if we want to be able to see this by year, whether we're improving or not improving or staying the same, would we then put these numbers in the high school? It would be bullying, so last year it was 11 and this year it was 2. Would that be right? And the year before that it was 7, 11, 2. And then so the last column are bullying incidences that have been reported by somebody using the online
Mhm.
portal. When that happens, is there then an investigation?
So yeah, so that information is forwarded to the building principal and follow up whenever possible.
Okay, and then how do you go from a report to an incident? So for instance, I have reports on online portal. I don't have any other information about reports. So if I walked into the middle school principal and said, you know what, my child is being bullied here, I would not see that in this table. If it were not then determined to be an actual bullying incident.
Infinite campus.
Yeah, I think if there's any report that is actually like if there's an investigation into an incident and there's follow-up with students, that would be in the Infinite Campus data.
So it's an incident from the time of report. I guess what I'm trying to find out is I've got a column that says reported through a certain means. And then I've got a column that says number of bullying incidents. And I'm trying to determine if the 2 is part of the 9 or the 2 stands alone or, so Renee, just tell me if I'm looking at the number 23 bullying incidents, does that mean you had 23 reported and 23 you investigated?
It means that we handled referrals on 23.
Referral meaning what?
A discipline referral. It
So that
doesn't
means a
necessarily
determination of bullying?
mean- Pardon?
So at the
yes,
point.
if we had a referral, it was checked in the bullying category.
Okay, so the numbers in the number of bullying incidences are confirmed by investigation.
Yes.
Okay,
We
so the
investigate them.
thing I don't have is total number of reports. So let's say there are 50 reports, but only 10 are confirmed incidences. That's a number that's helpful to me, because that says to me somebody thinks they're being bullied or something else is going on, but only 10 are really determined to be at that level.
Well, I think that anytime a person reports it, we take it seriously
Absolutely.
and follow up on it. And yes, there are varying degrees of confirming the confirmation of that in that process, but I think that you can, I would interpret that as saying that we had 23 incidents of bullying.
Okay.
And, you know, how many, if you want to know how many were substantiated,
That's the
I would say, you know, probably most of them. If it got to the point of being referred and investigated, that there was something going on that needed to be addressed. Because the other part of it is that teachers don't just refer students without really having a valid reason, and they do a lot of preventative work and informal work with students. And so I don't think, I mean, I can just say confidently that I don't think that those are frivolous referrals, that they're issues that we're dealing with.
Again, at some point, I think it continues to be helpful for us as a board to know very kind of how you deal with a bullying incident, a report, and then how you kind of walk through it. But I think it's really critical. If we're putting these numbers out publicly, I think it's got to be very clear to the public. And I'm putting myself in those shoes in terms of what these numbers mean. Does a 2 at the high school mean there was a investigated and validated bullying incident?
Yeah, and just to clarify for the board, you know, we asked Krista to compile and present the data, but we did ask all of our administrators to be here so
That
they
was
can
great.
answer specifically
Right.
in their buildings how they deal with this. So, yeah, please feel free to address our administrators as well.
I can say for the high school that, yes, like the first column is the number of bullying incidents that were investigated and found to fit the definition of bullying as per the bullying policy. And the number of incidents reported online, that is a strict number of either parents, students, whoever put in things online that we investigated to our best ability. And if it was substantiated, then that would be in column 1 as well. And if it was, see, there's 7 of them that we either could not investigate or we did investigate to not find to be true bullying, so they're not figured into that first one. It could be that there's something else, it fell under something else, like a one-time incident, or it could be that they didn't give us enough information. Or sometimes at the end of those bullying incidents, it'll say something like, I just want you to know, or I just want this teacher to know, or so they want to be watched out for. And a lot of times they don't give us names or anything really to go by. But when it's in Infinite Campus, for us at the high school, it's been substantiated. We investigated it and we found it to fit the definition of bullying, and in the second column, we found it to fit the definition of harassment.
So the only thing that I'm still kind of curious about that we aren't getting in this report, and this is for future reference, is the total number of bullying reports. So that to me also talks about climate. So let's say at the high school, we only had 2 substantiated incidences, but we had 30 reports, 9 of which were through the portal. So we don't have that tonight, I get that, but some of that tells you something about the climate and how people feel in that climate. It's just an anticipation.
And in prior years, we did use the climate survey data sort of as a backup measure. That was another source of data that we had at the student level that's not available this year, that we used just sort of to triangulate. Because we can only include what's actually reported, which is an Infinite Campus, and if there are other students are encouraged to use the portal, if they have reports and connect with their trusted adults in school, and
I think the other important thing is the definition. So
Yeah.
like, because sometimes a student might come to us and be like, I've been bullied. Well, they haven't necessarily been bullied, but they've been disrespected. So then it would fall under disrespect. So it would be really hard to keep track of kids who think they're being bullied, when really it might be something else. It might just be a single act of a kid being, disrespectful or, aggressive or something like that. It might fall into another category. But that's what we have to figure out when we investigate each situation.
and when PBIS teams review the behavior data regularly too, they're catching all of
that's
those
good too.
reports.
Okay.
So, like of the high school, the 9, would those 2 necessarily have grown out of those 9, or could they be completely separate?
as Chris was sort of saying, they could be separate. They
Uh-huh.
could be of those two, but it could be that all 9 were either unsubstantiated or I just want someone to know, no follow-up is needed. The kids or parents are allowed to, like she was saying, choose their desired response, and a lot of times it isn't. Most times it's not, I want someone to follow up and do something about this. It might be a conversation, it might be a just got this, I'm aware, or it's reported anonymously too.
It's not that, I mean, not that we don't have great kids, but
Yeah.
2 in a high school of 1,000 for a whole year seems pretty small. Is there like other teachers that notice it and might bring it up, or, I mean, like, obviously, you know, Taylor Prairie, Cottage Grove, kindergarten, first grader, second grader isn't gonna get bullied and run and pull their smartphone out and write on the portal, right? So, I mean, there's gotta be other instances. I don't know how we track that.
Well, perhaps one of our administrators could speak to that about what type of incidents might you deal with that don't end up in Infinite Campus, but you know, addressed.
Yeah.
Well, I can say that the portal reporting is sometimes difficult because the student can say something happened on the bus, but they're not willing to identify themselves, him or herself, in the report. So you don't know who's making the report. But they may put the perpetrators in there. So then we always follow up on it. I mean, if someone's going to fill that out, we assume that it's a problem. But sometimes the report is incomplete. And, you know, you don't have all the information. And so you can follow up with the perpetrators, for example, but you still may not know, you know, who was it that filed this report. So I don't feel that that reporting mechanism, I mean, it's one way to do it, but it's not all that helpful sometimes.
Right. And it's really not that helpful for our data, right? Because, I mean, there has been more than 9 bullying incidences, or at least complaints, in the high school in the whole year, right? I'm assuming.
It allows parents and
No.
other people to report
Right.
information.
Right.
But I find that parents are also very, you know, willing to pick up the phone or email and let us know when
Right.
they have concerns that they
Right.
feel we need to be.
I'm sure a lot of them
up on.
get handled in the parent-teacher, right? Teacher can handle a lot of that in their classroom. Now, if you do an investigation on a portal report, is there a central place to go to get all that, or where does that go to? Where do the results go to?
To come to our building administrators.
So like
Results?
The result.
The-
the results of the investigation, like so we know that it got investigated to the fullest
It goes
completion.
into Infinite Campus if it was substantiated.
And if it wasn't,
And at Cleveland Drummer School last year, because I was part of that, if you would get a bullying incident report online and you do the investigation and you determine it's not bullying, what we do is write what we found out, and then we would file that in the student file if we had a student name in their file in the building. Now, I know this year, talking with James, any of those reports that they get through, they actually have a regular binder that they keep them, just so they have record of them regardless. I mean, if they don't even qualify for bullying, but they got them, that way they know that what the recourse was.
okay.
So it might not qualify for a bullying report, but we always kept them in-house so that we knew if something else came up, we had some level of record.
So for instance, say, I write you and say, Dean is being crazy on the bus, like we can't handle him, right? But I don't sign my name or anything. You do an investigation, nothing there, but then 2 weeks later, Dean causes a major problem. Then the parent of this kid calls you up and says, hey, I told you Dean was being crazy on the bus. Do you have a place to go back and say, you know, we did look into that. We had no name here. We, you know, just as a protection for everybody involved, right? So, okay. And is there any way to, I guess it's probably really hard to do, but there's got to be more bullying coming on individually in the buildings to track that too, or not? I mean, I love all the things we're doing to overcome that, but I don't think we're at a zero yet in a lot of these buildings, right? I mean,
I think when you think about the actual definition of bullying, which people have been sort of required to use in this context, these data probably are relatively accurate. I think Chris makes a good point about the lower level behaviors, or if it hasn't established a trend or a pattern over time. We want to document that, respond, prevent it from becoming an actual incident of bullying where it's where the severity is it's repeated over time. So I think that is a place where you do have to use your data from a lot of sources. What other behavior reports might this student have? You know, in the portal, are we seeing lots of bus incidents, which we're not, but I'm saying, for example, if you see a pattern in a certain location, or it is really a matter of using all of your data to continue the prevention efforts, and then making sure when something really is it is actual bullying that we're documenting it and have a good record of that.
Dean?
A couple questions. How do you differentiate between harassment and a bullying? Seems like the language that's used here in your definitions, there's a lot of overlap. And does it make a difference to make that distinction?
I think we're required to make that distinction.
By
I
law.
think there's a lot of overlap. Yeah, by law, they are required to be distinct reporting categories. There's definitely a lot of overlap in terms of what the behavior looks like. But I think that's just an ongoing conversation with staff and with all the folks dealing with behavior. It's just something to reiterate and relearn and remember, and they are very similar in some ways. But
My other question is, as I observe the data, because before when we've gotten this, I think it raises the question. It seems to me that the last column on reporting the bullying instances online is just in telling us that somebody's using the online system. They could do it by telephone, they could do it in person, they could do it in writing. It might be, it seems to me the first two columns, you might separate that column out because it keeps raising the issue on that. It seems to me that the number of bullying instances investigated is really the first column, and harassment incidents investigated. And then your sources of the instrument, the sources of those, if you want to keep telling us that they use the online, but every time we've had this report, we hear that the online thing is simply a starter. It says maybe something happened.
Hey, Jennifer?
This is a minor point. Under the bullying policy statement, actually it's under harassment. The last two lines are a little confusing as far as punctuation and grammar. Sorry, but I gotta do it. So when you say in school, it might help to use a hyphen, to use that as a description of the environment. And this is just, we have intimidating, and then you have hostile, and then you have in-school environment. So I know it's tiny, but if you're like trying to read the policy and description, it's very awkward. All right, sorry, got to do it.
and those
So
are,
we need to fix that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Your English teacher.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, thank you. Thank you
not
very
clear.
much.
Thank you.
Unclear is not cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so then we come back to the superintendent's report.
Okay, two items this evening. I'd like to just give you a brief update, the strategic planning piece. And if you recall, the board last discussed this on October 1st and about conceptually how we wanted to do this. And then I had a task of working with Jack and Joanne in doing some of the pre-planning. And just want to let you know that I did recently have a conference with them to work for that. And we talked about a tentative timeline. I'll get that out to you shortly. We're still working at that, so I didn't want to get something out that's going to change. But we're looking at trying to get, number one thing is getting our citizen stakeholder group together. We talked about that being a large group, and so I'm currently putting together a draft of all the different groups, approximately the number of people that we want, and then starting to solicit names. And so I've met with the administrative team to ask for some assistance there. So I just want to give the board a heads up right now to be thinking about community members or parents, anyone at all that might be in those stakeholder groups we talked about that you think are people that we should consider asking to be part of that committee. And then I'll come back to you here in the next couple of weeks asking for those names, formally, whether do through email or at board meeting, with the understanding. And now I want to have those dates set too, so that when we ask these people, we can make sure that here are the dates that are set, have a commitment, and so on. So we probably need a much larger list than the number that we're going to end up with, knowing that some people are going to have conflicts.
What are you going to do with these people?
So that's the group that we talked about, that we're going to review the visioning and talk about the kind of the big ideas. So they'll be putting together a draft of some of the priorities, which then will come to the board to finalize and adopt as part of the strategic planning process. So it's really that kind of that focus, I don't know if focus group is the right word, but the large group to gather that data. So what I said, what I'll do is share that out with you of kind of that tentative plan of here are the groups, number of people, and we'll have that all reviewed by the board before we finalize anything and actually go ahead and make commitments and have people to participate.
My question is, are you going to have them to come up with ideas and different issues or something like that, or to validate the ideas and issues that the board adopted, or both?
No, I think we talked about using the last strategic plan as a starting point. So some of those ideas that will carry forward, but then also to broaden that. To come up
They
with
help
new things.
generate.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
One of the strategies that we use in a different setting is to tell people they've been nominated to serve instead of you being asked to be on a committee.
Mhm.
So if that helps in this case.
Maybe.
I'm thinking of a few names of people that if you say, you've been nominated by Carrie Robbins to serve, represent whatever stakeholder group. I mean, it's fine for me to use it that way, but I'm not sure, I don't want anyone to feel like it's a punishment to have been
Mhm.
asked. I think we want to treat it like it's an honor to be identified
Yeah.
as someone who has something to contribute.
Thank you, appreciate that. Do that.
Susan?
Well, and then, Dan, do you want to get just to the board kind of the list of the groups that you're identifying that you want to be represented on this? We talked about community members, but I want to make sure, and I know you're already thinking about this, but I don't know how this fits. But again, we want to make sure teachers and all staff
Mhm.
are included in this process somehow.
Yeah, so my intention is exactly that, to share with the board my draft or recommendation about here are the different groups, how many people in each of those, share that with you, and basically, make sure the board's good with that before we actually.
Well, and again, it would be helpful to know if your thought is to target business or mix that with community. I don't know.
Yeah, so my intention would be next time I report out, which could be as soon as the next board meeting, for sure in December, to have all this in writing for you to review and to make sure it's clear to answer these questions. Here's exactly what we're looking at doing for the groups, the goals and objectives of each of these meetings and potential meeting dates.
And then you'll ask us for possible suggestions.
Exactly.
That we have no understanding that we should limit that to a name and a account.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, and then the second part, I wanted to update you on the process of with the implementation of the teacher compensation plan and the first round review of applications. And again, I don't have a written report tonight, and that's by design. As you know, we're working through this first phase of it, and going to make adjustments as we go along to try to make the process better, more clear for our teachers, what's expected. What I can tell you is that we had 28 applications submitted in the first round. Our principals have completed the reviews. They've completed their scoring. Nicole and I are in the process of processing those, putting them together, writing the feedback sheets. I'm reluctant at this point to talk about the number that will be approved for the professional leader teacher, just because we want to maintain confidentiality. The teachers haven't been notified yet. We want to make sure. Some of the teachers may not want necessarily their names out there, whether they made it or not, and we want to make sure we have that communication with them, privately. And then certainly at some point the board does need to have all that data and so on. But just want to let you know that we're in the process of that, and we're hoping by the end of the week to have those review sheets and the feedback forms to the teachers completed, that we can get to them, completed by the end of the week, and then we'll have those, in writing and if possible, even some individual conversations. I can tell you that we had a number of excellent applications. So we have many teachers that we are recommending promotion to that level. We had a number of them that were very close that we think need to just clean up a couple things in their application, and will likely then be passed on, and so that's what we're working on, is that clear feedback so that they can do that. And then others that weren't as close, but all in all, very impressive group of applications, and And I'd also want to just publicly really commend our principals that worked on that. It was a lot of work for them to go through that. We originally designated a full day with it to come in and review, but we had to spend the whole day basically just going through the process. We scored a couple together just to, get that, reliability, and then with that many hours of review in detail. And I would say that they did an excellent job of really, being objective, and I think the other thing we had to do is put together clear rubrics. What was in the actual plan were really more of kind of the standards that need to be met, but they really weren't rubrics about how you meet that. So I gotta give Lisa Hype a lot of credit. She put that together based upon the standards, the master educator standards. A lot of that came from there, but there's some pieces that weren't covered there that we had to develop ourselves as well, particularly on the leadership piece. I'll make sure I share that all out with the board. So now, looking ahead, we will have those actual rubrics to be able to share with the teachers. That will be helpful, the score sheets, so they'll have a better understanding about how it's going to be scored in the future. We said this first round of teachers, we give them a lot of credit for putting themselves out there and going through this, and that the other teachers that follow will benefit from their work. We have a number that we believe that will be great samples. Of course, we want to make sure we communicate with those teachers to get their permission to use that as sample work, that we put out. So the goal is to keep each round as we go along, a little bit more information, refine the process to make it easier. So the next round is soon. Double check the date here. It's in December. Yep. And so the goal will be that we, number one, give that feedback for those 28 teachers who submitted. That's the number one priority, to be clear there. And then we will make something available to all teachers, some additional information, reminding them about the timeline and process, and hopefully some clarity that we can learn from this first round to help them with those. And I would expect the next round after that even more. So that as we get through by the end of the year, I think we'll have a much clearer process for our teachers as far as really understanding the expectations.
Did you, did any new criteria arise? You don't have to say which ones. You used the master teacher rubric as the criteria plus the formal stuff. Did any new concepts emerge?
Actually, yeah. We know that we had 4 key points that we talked about. I'm reading right from the piece. We have the advanced classroom teaching practices, 1, professional collaboration is 2, reflective practice and professional growth is 3, and then the formal and informal leadership 4. And so we had each of those 4 areas, but our application form was very heavy on the advanced classroom teaching practices. We actually had 7 different pieces that we scored, while those first 4 all tied to that 1. So we talk about in the future, we want to maybe consolidate that and have those more equal. But that's what we got from the master educator, piece. And so we don't want to change that right now in midstream, but we want to be clear about how those are weighted. So that's something we want to come back to the board's committee and board ultimately if we want to change those. I think we would get through this whole year and then come back with some recommendations for revisions, for the following year.
You don't want to make a revision between now and the next round?
I don't think so, because I think we have teachers that I know are actively working on their applications. The ones that completed them, we expect them to go back and make some revisions. And so, and I think we have to give a lot of thought to that too, about how we might change that. But I think we'll definitely be coming back at the end of the year with some recommendations for,
the end of the calendar year?
Yes, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Susan?
Dan, could you put together some type of very simple feedback form so the teachers could fill that out and talk about how they felt about how it went? Because that's going to be a large part of what we need to look at. Some of it may not necessarily work, but again, when we do a patient evaluation form, we take that really seriously, and we work on, particularly if there's a thread that's very clear that we could do better. So as part of our continuous improvement, one of the ways, it's not just you evaluating how you've done it, but I think how that was interpreted by the other people that were involved in that process.
Yeah. I agree. Thank you. The feedback is really important, and in fact, I also hope to have the time to actually meet individually with the teachers and have that discussion. Because as you know, the teachers that now we're in that category, will be part of the pool of future reviewers. And so I think it's easier to actually have a conversation with them about that and what that means. And I know there'll be some hesitation in some of the teachers to be part of that. And I'd like to actually have one-on-one discussions with them and really to make sure they clearly understand, how that would work and, the purpose and so on. But you're right, the feedback is
And
huge.
again, I see those a little differently. So you go into a teacher and say, we feel you met the criteria under these circumstances. We feel that you still need to work on this criteria under these circumstances. I see that a little differently, that discussion. Then, do you have any recommendations for improving this process?
Yeah. I agree. We will do that.
Okay.
Okay, good. That brings us to J, board reports, starting with the policy committee. Susan?
The policy committee met on November 3rd, and we checked in on all of the previous policies that we had approved and sent off from the 0000s, the bylaws, into the 3000s we're now working on. And we found a few more that we needed to review in the 2000s, that kind of thing. So we did some of that meeting and then sent it back. So we're going through a fairly thorough process within the committee itself. And then the other thing we've noticed, and actually Dan had noticed this effect, that in the Neola organization, occasionally the same policy will actually appear in 3 sections because it covers the same thing, but it relates to one, for example, relates to administrative staff, so it's in that section. It also applies to professional staff and also to support staff. So, and because we changed the language the first time we saw it, we have to go back and make sure we're doing it the same way all 3 times. So we're trying to keep track of all of that as well. Then we also checked into a form that I hope you all looked at in preparation for tonight, or if not, next time. There was a document prepared almost a year ago now on substantive changes from our current 100 series to the Neola counterpoint part, which is the 0000s, the bylaws of the board. And that document, the intention of that document was to point out whatever substantive changes there were, because a lot of times it's just language changes, it's not particularly substantive. And then also to include items that are actually not covered. So you have in your board docs on this a few pieces. There's the sheet that says changes from the old 100 series. That's what I'm referring to right now. And that one, you'll notice that it goes through and it sort of explains what our process was, and then it goes through the few where there were actually some substantive changes. And then at the bottom of page 2 of that, it talks about some that aren't in this section, but they are generally in other Neola sections, 110, 11, 12, and 191, for example, are all replaced by different numbers because of the organizational difference. And then there were 2 policies in our series, 192 and 193, which don't seem to be in Neola. And both of them are ones we need, I think, so we'll be developing those when we get to them. The one on student memorials would be in the 5000 series, which deals with students. 193, recognition of major contributors, likely would be in the 9000s. We haven't gotten anywhere near that far yet, so at some point we'll deal with those. So just so you know, we're not losing track. As far as a process for you to go through them, that's kind of up to you. You can simply read through them all. And then I would suggest that you read this document on the changes, the substantive changes. The last 2 things that are here are 2 grids where you can compare if you want to go that deeply. You may not, it's certainly not required. The first one takes the 100 series and then tells you where it is cross-referenced in Neola. The other one starts with the Neola policy and tells you where it is in other policies. And you'll see when you go through that some of them we didn't have, like we didn't have one that stated the official description of the district, for example. Sometimes we had some administrative guidelines that they don't have, they incorporated in the policy, something like that. You'll notice, for example, we put the qualifications for running for the board in policy now. We put the oath that you take, which is right out of the statute, in the policy. That wasn't in our previous one. So there are a few things like that. And the only one I saw that's an addition is kind of minor, I guess, on the sheet that talks about the 100 series. we had a 114, it was harassment as it applied to school board members, volunteers, and other community members, and that's actually ruled into, that was, 145, and then 1666 even deals with that a little bit, so pretty much they're all covered. So the thought is that you can read through these, this will be considered the first read. I don't know if anyone has questions tonight. If you do, we could talk about some of them tonight. You might want to, because we are thinking of asking for approval at the next meeting. So I guess I should, just one additional comment before I ask if people have kind of worked into this next item. But questions on it is that there was a new statute passed in this, well, along with the budget bill, that now, after the budget bill actually, just recently, Wisconsin Act 63, I think, which requires us to, we have a policy that tells how we fill board vacancies if someone leaves the board, but because of a major issue at the scene where they were left with a tie board and they voted with literally two different political persuasions. They voted 36 times and couldn't agree on a new candidate. They couldn't make a lot of decisions because they were stuck. They couldn't get majority votes. So the legislature passed a bill saying that if we don't choose a candidate within 60 days of the vacancy, we have to have a policy that explains how we will make that decision. In other words, if for some reason we can't come to a decision in 60 days, that has to be written in policy, but it's not due until next July 1st. So I had written some possible language because I thought there were a couple easy solutions to that, but the committee decided we really should maybe wait until WSB and Neola comes out with suggested language, because they will. I mean, Neola will give us an update and they will include language.
Just got an email this afternoon from WSB,
okay.
So they have, I haven't looked at the suggested yet, but.
So they have some, so there are only a couple options you can do, I think, but anyway, that's the only thing. So, did anyone have a chance to look at some of these and have any comments, or?
Everybody read them in detail, right?
Right.
Actually, I have a, my first question is, there's a number of things that have been added that are actually defined by statute, which, they're not our policy at all, they're statute, and the examples I would give are 141-0141, for example. Is that right? Hold on a second. The Board of Education shall consist of 7 members. That's not policy.
Right.
That is determined by the annual meeting.
No, it's determined.
But statute says 3, 5, or 7, and then the annual meeting gets to
You
determine
change it, right.
how many there are.
Right.
And at some point, apparently, that isn't passed. It was determined to be 7. But it's not a board policy. And in fact, it's the 0 for 1, 0 for 2, et cetera, that all of these things are statutory, not policy. And I'm wondering why, I think for the most part, they're statutory, not policy. Except we don't, for example, always use the exact wording that's in statutes. And the statute could also potentially change. And I'm wondering either we should just leave them out, or we should reference them by statute to the statute, rather than having what looks like our own language. Or because actually having them as policy has no effect. The fact that we have a policy that says the Board of Education shall consist of 7 members has absolutely no effect on anything. It's because it's not set by, right? You could look to this. You can look at this document only as as a reference to statutes, and maybe we would have a statute separate document say these things are referenced to statute or something like that. But that statement has no force at all. So I'm not sure why it should be in the policy.
Well, I think we felt that some of these statements, yeah, we don't need to have them, and you're going to find some policies throughout that we don't need to have, but we felt like this is the more ready resource that most people turn to. And if you want to run through the board and you want to look, it's just easier to look here than it is to look up the statute. You can look up the statute if you want. I'm not clear on what the process is of, I don't know, Dan, were you starting to say something about the membership?
Sure, and that's what I would echo what Susan said. I think if someone, you're right, this is not necessarily policy that the board can change on some of these things, but it is a good information place. It's not an easy thing to change the number of board members. That is something that will be done through an annual meeting.
Right.
No question about that. And But no different than a number of our policies do reference statutes, and as the statutes change, yeah, we need to update the policies to reflect that. That's one of the positives about Neola, they'll automatically give us that information as they change. So, but you're right, you don't have to have it in there. The question is, do you think it's good to have there as information for the public, as a place to find it?
Well, my gosh, first of all, sometimes the legislature says you shall have a policy
Mhm.
along these lines, in which case we have to write a policy even though and then reference
Yeah.
the statute appropriately. In these cases, there is no role, there's no legal role for our policy.
Mhm.
This is just information only.
Yep.
A couple of things I worry about. One is the people, and these are actually abbreviations of the statute.
Mhm.
People might read this in a particular case and say, and come away with something that's different from the statute. Like, for example, if you look at school electorate, the school district is eligible to be board member, there's another line in the statute that is for a special case that probably will never happen, but is actually the law and actually makes this not valid in that particular case, and that case is when the school district splits. It's kind of, it's a thing. So I'm just a little bit worried about the right way to handle this stuff that is purely established by statute. And maybe what we should have is a separate section that says these items are established by statute, and here's your guide for them, but maybe not call them our policies. I don't know.
Well, the statutory sites are here, but Susan had a comment.
Yeah, one of the things we did very carefully was when we looked at Neola, if we already had a board policy that was the same or similar, we generally left the Neola policy. So if you wanted to make this argument, I would have appreciated it prior to the Neola transfer, although it's good to have it now. But if you look at Board Policy 130, which is the one we've had since 2001, that's the process we followed before. And it says, the board shall, mandatory, consist of 7 members. They shall serve for a term of 3 years, except as otherwise provided. And they're going to be staggered, so 2 or 3 are elected each year. So, and then we give the legal reference to that. What we could do is actually put the legal reference, so it's very clear when it's statutory, immediately after that line, if that's helpful to know. So then, when you look at that board policy, you know it's straight statutory language versus an interpretation of statutory language. So, board policy has always been, and if you want to change that, then that's a major conceptual change, and it will mean going back and starting over. If you want to, first of all, when you're talking about the school board legal status, I think you want a place where the community can go. We had a community member that very recently talked to me about our policies. So they're clearly looking at that, reading those, and figuring out how, particularly in this instance, their child fits within this policy. So what we've always done is written the policy, and if it's based on statutory site, we've added the reference down below. Maybe you're right. A clear way to do that would be to put it directly after that sentence. But we want our community to be able to go to one place rather than to go back to the index and look up a statute that specifically says you have to have 7 board members when we're basically talking about the general status of the board.
Yeah, I don't have any questions about the fact that we want one place as a reference. But I do want to avoid the apparent conflict, the appearance that we're establishing some things in policy that we can't, that we aren't, that are already established in statute. And perhaps it is the way, I don't think it's going back to the beginning. I think this section is the one that's most problematic there. And I think maybe the way to do that is to just say at the beginning, the following items are defined by statute and are provided here for reference. I think that might be a way to deal with that.
I personally don't see that as necessary because the statutory sites are all here. There are times throughout the policy where we quote statute. The expulsion policy is a perfect example. Our language is right out of the statute. We don't say that, but at the bottom, the statutory side is there. I just don't see that as necessary personally. I appreciate your point, but I
Does anybody else
would
have
not
any
recommend
consideration?
going back and changing it.
I would tend to agree with Susan, particularly if the language of the policy is duplicative of the statute, and then with the citation underneath it. I think it might be interesting someplace in the policy document to discuss this in a sentence or two. That when we cited the Wisconsin statute, we are taking it verbatim, something like that.
No, we aren't always. The sites are always there when the statute applies. We don't say that. We'd have to go back through and find out.
Oh, okay.
Again, it would be
What do? You just put it in and...
Well, our old policies had a lot of statutory language in it, so we looked, as Susan said, we looked at Neola, we looked at our old policies, and we picked the language we liked the best. Some of these things weren't in there, like the description of the district. The number of word numbers was, as Susan pointed out, in our old policy. So all we did was leave it there. It just stands by itself here. It's organized differently. Our old policy had several paragraphs that talked about electors. So the information, I don't really see why it's relevant to know whether it's statutory language or not. I mean, you can look it up. Some of the weirder worded ones from Neola, when I thought this is odd wording, and I look it up and find out that it was straight from the statute, and that's why they worded it that way. But generally, when the statutory site is here, and if you look at this, you'll see that it's listed under all of these. It tells you
What
the
you're
site
saying,
is.
you're telling me you're doing is that if you have policy language that's substantially based on statute,
Right.
you simply note that and go on.
We note the statutory site at the bottom of the policy, just like we did in all of our previous policies. I mean, we could have used our policies that we had and used WSB. It would have, this part would have stayed exactly the same.
Well, I see
Everything
no
would change.
necessity to restate the statutes in one place and policy which will repeat it in another place.
Right.
I think as long as you appropriately cite it, so
Right.
that somebody, if they wanted to,
They can look it up.
they could go look it up.
That was.
And see if you've done it right or something.
Right.
Jennifer?
I need a little clarification. Is there anywhere at the beginning of our policy monster that states, as you reference, please note? So is there a way to guide the reader who's not well-versed in how to use that statutory information at the bottom of a page? Because typically with a reference tome, there is some kind of, here's how to use this document. So it's one thing to be in the mix of policy, it's a whole other thing to be someone coming in from a different culture and just needing to identify and look. So I'm just asking, do we have anything like that?
We don't, and the problem with that is most people are never going to go to the beginning of the manual because it's electronic.
Because it's electronic,
If you want
I
to look for
see.
policy right now, you
Yeah.
go to board policies.
Right.
Let's say I want one that relates to students, I click on 400.
Right.
I want to look at the policy for non-discrimination and access to equal educational opportunity. I click on that, and I read through the policy, and right at the bottom of that policy, it'll give me all kinds of state and federal statutes that it's based on. And so there's really, to me, that's an obvious. I look at that and say, oh, this is based on statute. And the easiest one to look up is Wisconsin Statute 118, so I'd look it up and I can see what's language and what's not. I don't think it would serve any good purpose to put a general statement. In fact, most people have never looked at the beginning.
Because of the way we
Because
use
of
it
the-
now.
It's all PDF
Right.
and it's all, you look at your individual policy one at a time, you don't.
Thank you.
Nobody
And
in their right mind is ever gonna read the whole manual, except you're
Right.
gonna have to at some
Because
point.
it's got it. And then my second clarification is, so Peter, when you brought this forward, I was hearing there's an agent of power.
Mhm.
And it's either vested in us or it's
Mhm.
vested in the state.
Mhm.
And so is there a way to communicate that aspect to policy? And I'm just asking, and I think perhaps that's what you were asking, and I'm wondering how often or how
That-
significant does that happen?
That's a good way to put it. I guess my thought is that our policies should be the things that we can change. that we adopt them, because when we adopt them, it has force. We can adopt 124, 142.3 all we want, but our adoption has absolutely no effect on anything, because it's, state law says it's this. And I think that we should clarify, somehow I think we need to clarify these things, because somebody can't come to us and say, I'd like you to change this, but 132, they can ask us to change, 142,
Well,
they
they can
can't
ask us and we can explain to them that it's
Yeah,
statutory.
yeah.
It's pretty simple.
I don't think you need two places where here the state governance and the local. I think you put them all together and just simply cite them. That this source is federal statute, you know,
I would
federal
agree.
regulation or state statute, and let it, you know, but they're all based on state statute because you're authorized to make policy.
Right.
You don't have to do those. But the ones where you substantially copied them, I just think if you cite them at the end, that's enough.
Carrie?
And we can do that.
Yeah, I agree with what was said about the problematic nature of adding it forward because of how people access it individually. I absolutely agree with that. I will tell you, as someone new to this and coming to it and trying to figure out what the statute citation means at the bottom, I've struggled some with the point that Peter raised, that if there's a statute listed at the bottom, you don't know whether that said the language above is required because of the statute, or whether the statute tells us we have to make something up to have for our policy. It just has a statute at the bottom. So it really is hard to know as a layperson whether this is something that the group of people now has determined versus the legislature has determined for us. And if you had a beef with it, where to take your complaints, so to speak. And so there is an interesting dynamic of listing the statute but having that listing mean two different things.
See, I just don't see that as an issue, because I think if someone has an issue with a policy, they raise it with us. If it's statutory, we explain it, it's statutory. If it's something that isn't statutory and we think they have a good point, it goes to Dan, and he can decide with staff to bring it to the policy committee and we deal with it. I just don't think it's that hard. I think we're making something that's not that difficult, far more complex. And to me, if you have little separate sections and you do all this, that's way more complicated. To me, this is very easy. It's easy to find stuff. One of the things I like about the Neola format is that they do break a lot of things out, so yes, it's just easier.
Susan?
I don't know.
Susan?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One, why don't we post on Board Docs? There's actually a legal comment from WSB called the legal significance of school board policies. So what we're talking about here is a concept, you know, and instead of looking at the revision of moving from the hundreds to the 0,000s, now you're bringing up the question of what is a school board policy. And I think that's, if you want to do that before we start this process, that's fine. Let's put that in the process and we'll talk about what is a school board policy. And then we can talk about whether or not we like these revisions. But it's if you Google the legal significance of school board policies, WSB legal comment, and I was trying to look and see if it was written on top of it. But it basically talks about Wisconsin statutes give school boards the explicit authority to do all things reasonable to promote the cause of education, including establishing, providing, improving school district, But, and then they explain that the statutory duties and powers shall be broadly construed. So, I mean, even if it's straight statutory language, that doesn't mean if there's a case that it won't be found to be invalid. So, it's a nice article that'll give us a general idea. The other thing is, if you look in 0122 of Neola, I think it outlines pretty well the thought process here, and that is the power of this Board of Education extends to those matters expressly or implicitly granted by the Constitution, statute, local charter, or ordinance or other law, including the power to do all things reasonable to promote the cause of education. That's statutory. Okay, 120.13. Then it goes on to say the board shall also authorize the development and promulgation of rules and guidelines to do the work that they need to do as a board and through the superintendent. So what we're trying to do is put together a group of policies. So for instance, when we wrote the policies on HIPAA for physician practices and hospitals, we had to use the law to write those policies. So we said, this is what you're gonna have to do, because the law requires you to do it. But this is how you're gonna have to do it right now as the law is interpreted to be valid. And that's effectively what we've tried to do here. If you have a question about, so we've already cited you back to the original policy that says exactly what this Neola policy does. So truthfully, what is your question about the revision? That's one thing. And then if you have a bigger conceptual concept, then let's take this off and deal with it. Because you're asking a question that is not related to this to this. This to this is very clear. In this particular instance that you cited, there's little or no change, and there is clearly no substantive change. So you're questioning the original
Pretty much
policy.
in that sheet.
Yeah.
I mean, so really,
You're
you're
questioning
arguing
the
about
Well,
format.
no,
So
I mean, I don't think that these things, electoral process and so on, were defined previously.
Yeah, they were. They're in 130.
I just cited it,
read it.
130.
And I
And
just found it, I'll read it again.
The board
The other
consists
issue
of
is-
7 members.
But thank you for stating that, because you gave us a list of the things that is our authority, and all of these things in 0141, 042, 043 are not in our authority. They're not in our powers, so we shouldn't have policy. Well, I think it's a guideline. It's not in our power to set the number of members of the Board of Education. It's not in our power. You gave me a list of the things that were our powers.
And yet
That's
it's
not
been
one
our
of them.
policy
I understand.
ever since 2001, and that was when WSB went through and redid it, and they approved it, put it in there.
I understand it,
It's
and
in
now we're
other
doing it
board
again,
policies.
which is the.
See, I don't
Okay.
agree with you because I think it is what we have now, and I think it's good for people to know that. I frequently ask people, do you have 9, do you have 5, do you have... I think it's helpful to have it in here, and if somebody comes to an annual meeting and they petition us ahead of time and they want it on the agenda of the annual meeting changes it to 9 or 5 or whatever, then we change the policy to match it, obviously. It's the same thing as when a statute passes and a policy change, like the board vacancy is a good example. We just went through that policy a couple of years ago. We developed all these guidelines, we spent a lot of time on it, as you recall. Never occurred to me there'd be an issue that we wouldn't be able to decide on something. Well, now there's been one board that did, so they passed a law that says we all have to have a policy of what to do if we can't find someone within 60 days. So now we're told we have to go back and change that when that happens too. And that's part of one of the nice things about being with Neola is they send us language as these things come up because they follow our laws. So I just. I guess I think if this was going to be an objection, this should have been raised before you ever started. This should have, what do you want your policy in? Because this is not any instruction we ever had before. The instruction was simply to convert our old policies into the Neola format, and that's what we're doing. And in this case, we use the same stuff that was in there. The only thing that's new in here is the description of the district that's earlier, and some things like that. We thought that's kind of nice to have that there, so people can look it up. So I guess I would request if people have specific policies that they want to change the language of, I mean, if they don't like what it says, and that's what we tried to do in that sheet that tells you the substantive differences. For example, the one about that to approve, our current policy says to approve a policy, we need a majority vote of the board. That's how it's written. If we want to amend or delete a policy, we need a 2/3 vote of those present. So the new Neola policy says we simply need a majority of the vote of the board to do any of those things. That's one, for example, that people might have an opinion on. They might not want to change it. I don't know.
I actually had a question on that.
Yeah.
Does that mean we need 2/3 to pass this?
No,
Next time.
we only need a majority to pass this. We could have 2 concurrent policy books going on at the same time, because we approved this, and if we didn't have a 2/3 vote to delete the old ones, we would have just 2. I mean, that's where the policy is written. To approve new ones takes a majority, to delete or amend the old ones takes 2/3. And
Hang on, hold it. Let's stop it. Hang on, stop right there. If a new policy is a change to an old one, then that's a revision, and it takes a 2/3 vote to revise.
These
That's- and you
are
cannot
totally
have-
new policies.
doesn't-
Some of them don't.
No, what you just told
You'd
me,
have to
there
go
wasn't the
through
same.
and pick and choose each one of these, then you could never approve the whole series, because some of these are in different sections. They don't necessarily.
Well, except what you've told us is that largely, we're just revising our old policy. This is not new policy.
We're not revising it, we're
Right.
changing the format. We're not revising
Exactly,
the content.
which means it's a revision, and it takes 2/3 to revise it. That's fine. But
I'm
but
not sure
that's
I
fine.
agree with that. I'm not sure. I think that's something
That's
we'll have
okay.
to
You
decide
can
as a board.
disagree.
Well, not just me, the board will
The
have to decide.
board will have to
I
decide
don't
it.
think you
That's
get to
great.
decide either. think
I will
that's-
say this, procedurally, normally when you revise a policy, you simply, okay, you have your vote on that policy. In this case, you're gonna have two votes. You're gonna have one vote to approve these, you're gonna have a second vote, a resolution to delete all the other ones, which is different. So this is a unique
Well,
situation.
Well, except that you can make one vote to revise all of the old ones with the new ones.
But they don't all match up.
It doesn't have to matter.
But that is
Yeah,
the
you
legal
can't-
advice
well-
we have from Neola, is you're gonna have two resolutions.
And going
When we make
forward,
this
Peter, that's
revision.
gonna be way more problematic because the other sections are very different. I think to be consistent,
Well,
I think the way to do it makes sense to do it that way.
The other sections only require a simple majority.
Well, right, so it's not an issue, but the vote is the same. You adopt a section and then you delete specific old policies. And that's why we said the whole manual should be
Well-
adopted at the end with one vote, because we adopt this whole manual, we delete our
Well,
entire
I mean,
manual.
we shouldn't try and circumvent an existing bylaw, which is this 2/3 vote, by sort of legally saying, I mean, it's clearly a revision when you get rid of one and replace it with a new
It
one.
may not even be an
That's-
issue,
that's
because it
clearly-
may be a 2/3 vote.
I don't think that there's gonna be a problem, but,
I like the 2/3 vote.
yeah, exactly.
And I did research other districts while we're on that, and McFarland, Verona, Madison, Wanakee, DeForest all require a majority. Some just a majority of those who are present. Oregon's I couldn't find, Milton, Cross Plains, and Sun Prairie I couldn't access because you had to somehow sign into their board docs or something. Mequon, Thiensville's is the same as ours. I only looked that up because we tend to like their language, so we've used theirs a lot in the old. Theirs is the same majority of the board. WSB has 3 sample policies, and none of them specify the required vote for adoption, deletion, or revision. They simply say that there's no legal definition, it's a matter of local policy. Stoughton is the only one I found that is 2/3, and it's 2/3 for everything, creation, deletion, and for amendment. So the majority of boards in our area require a simple majority. Madison says a simple majority vote, some say a simple majority of the board, so it's all kind of.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just saying, DeForest is the only one I found that had a 2/3, and we're the only one that has both, that has a majority to create and a 2/3 to amend it.
The reason we
And
have.
I'd like us to discuss the rationale again if we're gonna keep the 2/3, because I
Yeah.
personally don't agree.
Jeff,
I think
you don't
that,
have your hand up.
what, I
Did you
didn't have
have
my
your
hand
hand
up,
up
but
or
if
no?
you want to discuss, if that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah, sure.
I just think it's important that we not push for 3 votes, because I think it made last year a lot rougher than it had to be, because we pushed a lot of 4-3 votes. And I think building consensus isn't that hard, especially amongst our board. And I think it's important to have the 2/3 vote.
So you have 5 votes instead. It
Yeah,
could still be
it adds
5-2.
one.
It could still be
It's
5-2,
adding one
but
vote.
that's the difference. That's a big
Okay.
difference.
And, the reason we have a majority of adopt and 2/3 amend is that's the language that's sort of comes from, is strongly recommended by Roberts, with right up front when they talk about bylaws. Because all rules of the society considered so important that they, A, cannot be changed without previous notice to the members and a vote of a specified large majority, such as 2/3 vote, and B, cannot be suspended with the exception of clauses that provide for their own suspension under specified conditions. The point of the bylaws is they're the rules by which you make decisions. And in Roberts, one of the important things is protecting minority rights. And if the bylaws sort of have a special status because we want to be able to trust the process. I might not be able to agree with the outcome, but I'm vested in the process, and I believe the process, and I trust the process. When you make it too easy to change the process, what happens is that you end up in situations where, in order to get something done, you change that you can't otherwise done. You change the process, and then you can get it done. And what that does is that breaks down confidence in the board, of the members in that process itself. And that's why they recommend this 2/3 majority. It protects the minority rights, and it helps build trust in this process. And that's why I believe that's why we have this rule, and that's why I believe that we should continue to have it.
And I'll just respond by saying that for years, this board was a simple majority for everything.
Mhm.
This change was made in about 2010, I believe. Well, I did look at our policy to see, I guess, 2010, 11, something like that. And it's just interesting to me that very few other boards do this. I mean, the only one I could find was DeForest. So I guess I don't see it as a big deal. To me, it's just easier to just have a majority vote. That's how we make all of our decisions, are by majorities, except this. And I don't see most of these as being much more significant than, in fact, I think they're less significant than a lot of decisions we make. I think a majority is generally the rule and generally the way bodies make decisions. And to me, it makes sense. And I don't much care what Robert's corporate view is. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, right. I mean, but a lot of bodies, when it comes to bylaws, look at U.S. or our local state house, when it comes to the
I'm more
bylaws,
interested
they
in
go
what
what
school
you
boards do than I am
I understand that, and I am more interested in building a process that everybody can trust.
Which apparently worked well.
And I mean, and really what we're talking about is one vote. And actually, it's arguable that we didn't have it, because according to Roberts establishes those rules, and if there's no other governing authority, and it says it has specific rules for bylaws. Our bylaws, our rules say we follow Roberts. If we followed Roberts, we should have required supermajority to change the bylaws.
No,
we just ignored it.
Our previous policy said majority.
No,
We
it didn't.
changed, yes, it did. We changed the policy.
The
I'll
previous,
find it.
okay, previous policy.
We changed the policy in 2010. The previous board policy said you could adopt, amend, or delete a policy with a majority vote. I remember that very
Okay.
clearly.
All right, I don't believe that was, I thought
Yes, it
we added
was.
the language.
No,
That's
we
okay.
You
changed it.
made the change.
You're the one who made the change.
I added language to
No,
policy.
You
I
that's
didn't
not
change it.
made
correct. I'll-
the
Okay, we can
change.
look, we can go look at the old policy, but
We can
I don't
find the
believe it
minutes.
was
It's-
originally there.
again,
There's no point in arguing now. The
I
question
agree.
is, what does
Don't
this
go back,
board
go
want?
forward.
If the majority of this board thinks
Yes.
we should stick to the 2/3,
Right.
then fine, we'll live with it. Those of us who think that's kind of silly, we'll live with it. So I think we just have to get there. So we've had that discussion, the rest of you need to think about it. Are there other,
Yeah,
I threw that out because I knew that was going to be a contentious
Right.
one, and that was the clearest contentious one. The others that are substantive, I don't think will be. One I think we should think about is a student representative. You know, that we had a policy on the books for years that we would have a student representative, and I don't know if many years ago they maybe did have one of them. There had not been one for a long time. We had a student who asked to be on it one year, so we did have a student, there was a student representative 1 year before I got on the board. And then after she left, there was no one else who wanted to be, so we haven't had that. Boards who have that seem to like it. They can't legally vote, but there are expectations. Madison has one, for example, and a couple other local boards do, I think. There is an expectation that they come to every meeting. I know when we talk to people at high school about it, they kind of thought, well, kids are really busy these days, and is that really the best use of their time? And we haven't had any interest from students. So we, let's see, our consensus was to delete our current policy and not replace it, given that we haven't had anyone express any interest, but if we wanted to leave it in there, we could. Public expression of board members, that's been our practice, but we never had any policy. We thought it should be in policy. Committees, the Neola policy gives the authority to create ad hoc committees only to the board, because that's been our past practice. I don't recall understanding committees ever creating, they can create work groups, they've never created full-fledged ad hoc committees. Our current policy says the superintendent shall deliver the agenda or cause it to be delivered to each board member at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. The new one says the agenda should be delivered no later than at least 2 days prior to the meeting. And of course, as we all know, they're online now. It's not, we used to get them in paper at our front door. Now, thank God, they're online. Makes them believe. Duties of the vice president, we added that in the case of a vacancy in the office of president, that the vice president would succeed to that. That was another addition. Otherwise, the duties are as has been past practice generally. So anyway, so those are the substantial difference, the substantive, not substantial, so these aren't really substantial, they're substantive. I mean, they're not necessarily hugely impactful, but they are substantive changes. So otherwise, go through and see if there's anything else, and think about the voting one, think about the student representation one. I think those are the two key ones. Anyone have any other comments or things to bring up?
Jeff?
Already,
I have a
Jeff?
couple.
Jeff, you were here when we went through these, so you should be familiar.
Right,
I mean, you're
most
on-
of them, no, some of that. I think we should have the student representative language in there, because I think we should encourage our students to get involved any way they can. So if they want to, I would hate to have a roadblock where somebody actually wants to. I understand why they don't want to, believe me, if you've sat through the last hour. But also public expression of board members. We've talked about that a lot. That's a lot of gray area there, and what happens. I mean, I don't understand the point of it.
Well, that's a pretty routine, that's a very common policy that you see, and it is in Neola, and I have seen it other places, and it's always when you go to WSB trainings, they always emphasize that as an individual board member, we have absolutely no authority. And therefore, you really can't speak for the board unless the board has authorized for you to speak for them. If you want to say, I'm a board member of Monona Grove, I personally feel this way on an issue, you can do that. But you're speaking as your own person then. You're not saying our board feels this way when the board may not feel that way. I mean, it's kind of, I know I've in the past taken on some of the legislative stuff, and if I think something's so significant, I really want to say the board feels this way, I've brought a resolution to the board to get agreement at a board meeting. Some boards give their legislative liaison authority to speak for them. But I've never had that from this board, so I never do that. I sometimes say, as a local board member, I feel this way when I write an email. So I think it is an important difference, I think, and I don't think we want to authorize individuals.
I don't think so either. I'm just saying, I don't
That's
know,
all
put
it
it in
says.
policy, how you enforce it, what you enforce it with, and who makes that decision.
It's an education thing. I think it's an important point, and I think it should be in policy. You can censure people.
You can,
you
the
can
board can
censure
censure
board
people.
members.
Yeah.
So if a board member is out there speaking and claiming they represent the board and they don't,
You can
Right.
to be
censure.
censured for that.
Right.
So I think it's an important thing.
I think what you say and sometimes what gets interpreted are two different things, and it's just
It's a reminder to
it's a
be
huge
careful.
gray area.
I mean, and I think it's important. I mean, I do try even in conversation, to say, well, here's how I feel, but the board hasn't discussed this. And I think.
Or on some items where the board's had a discussion, you know,
Right.
I might say, you know, I can't, we haven't done anything official, but I believe that
Right.
the board thinks, you know, would support that or not support that,
Right.
but I can't say officially.
I've done that too, so I think that's an important thing to have in policy, personally. Anything
Tina?
else?
What?
You didn't have your hand up, sorry, thought you had your hand
I'd forgotten now.
up. Okay, good.
Well,
We beat it out of you.
So if you haven't read through these, between now and the next meeting, read through them, and if you, you know, I think the other thing is if you do think there are substantive changes that you want to recommend to this, it'd be helpful to get an email before the board meeting, or just so we can put it on board docs, so it's in writing.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that. These are,
Now
this
I
is
remember.
long and complicated, hang on a second.
Oh,
And
now I
so-
gotta hang on.
Yeah, so if you do have something you want to say, you want to change, it would be advantageous if you could, you know, put that in writing and send it to us ahead of time,
Okay.
if you want to make some changes. Dean?
With regard to that, I like the way you've come up here on these policies, particularly when the policy, you may want to depart from what the current policy or practice is, or there's something to suggest you ought to bring it to the board ahead of time like this, so that we can take a kick at the cat, so to speak. But and I think that might, unless it's a pretty routine thing, but I think if it is a contradiction of policy or current practice or policies that you might feel substantial, I think it might help your work to bring ahead of time like this to us.
Oh,
So-
I think we've kind of agreed, I think we've heard you, I think to give you a manual this size and expect everybody to read through the whole thing is kind of absurd, so if we ever finish the 3000s, which I thought we'd be done by this month, we're not, and we won't be done now probably till January, because we're only gonna have one more meeting. We may be done by then. We are going to then transfer that whole 3,000 series to you guys in personnel, so you can look at it on your own in the committee,
Mhm.
chew it up, whatever you want. We haven't talked about whether you should bring it back to us before we do the full board. I guess it'd be helpful to bring it back to the policy committee. Then we bring it to the full board and, we'll wait and see. And we'll do the same thing with the 2,000 series. And then I think once we, if we get this one done, we could bring the 1,000s. They're ready. That could come to the board next while you guys are getting yours. And then gradually we'll be looking at them all in sections. I think the thing that everybody has to remember is that you really need to just look at that section and not worry about what's not there. I mean, you're really looking at just what it says. And do you agree with it, or do you have a problem with it? Because doing otherwise is the argument for getting the whole manual at once, so you can see the ones that are left out, that are in different places. Because the organization does get quite different once you get out of this section.
I think the idea, do we want to have a student representative for that sort of thing? Toss it around and let people express their.
We could certainly have the language in there, and then if there is one, fine.
Not to wordsmith it.
Right. Well, I'm kind of hoping that, our goal is to try to get this manual done by the end of the year. I realize now it's going to be a challenge. And if we bring it to the board and the board wordsmiths, the committee is trying hard not to, and it doesn't always work. We still have people who want to change a couple words now and then, but we're trying to make it just substantive changes. Because here's the deal, once we approve this, then the policy committee next year can start all over and start going through and saying, do we like the wording of this? Or as we go through and, if we pass it this year just to get it done and say, but I'd like you to work on the way this is worded because it's too wordy. Some of them are pretty worded because we're trying not to change that a lot. And lawyers wrote it, so it's,
Right. I'd like to move on, so if we don't have any more general
Speaking of
policy
wording,
discussion,
right.
Exactly. Carrie?
So just to summarize the first read on the policy about student representation, I heard both Dean and Jeff say you prefer to keep the language in to allow us to have a student representative. So do you think the best process for us is to go back in the policy committee and bring a revised version of it forward? Because the recommendation, the way it sat, the way Susan described it, was we were going to delete it because there hadn't previously been interest in the recent past. I actually agree with both of the points raised. Why not leave it in, despite the fact that there hasn't been a student? So I think, do you want us to go back and then bring a revised
Honestly, we might not ever use it, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it.
Well, first of all, I guess I'd like to do a thumbs up of how many people would like to put the students represented back in, so we know that it's, so I think Dean, you said you'd like a student.
No, I just said I'd like that you brought the idea forward to us.
Oh, okay, so
on
you're
that.
not necessarily
I
saying
wasn't,
back in.
I'm one way,
Well,
I could live with either way.
Well, here's what I would suggest, is that I find the language in the new policy that we just
And
took
bring it
out
forward.
and put it back in. Not put it back in, but bring it forward
Yeah.
at the next meeting, and then we can vote on it.
Right.
And it'll be
Yeah.
in Word docs ahead of time, so you can look at it.
Susan?
We had, what I'm looking for
This was
right
like
now
every
is
year,
a
so
previous
it's-
policy, and I'm not looking at the grid, which I should, but about having a student rep. And I do remember, I bet you do too, that we originally had one, and we took it out because there was no interest. We didn't take it out
That's-
because so
We
that's
took it
why
out of our
we
own
didn't
policy,
include it
right.
in the Neola.
Right.
Right.
But there's, the
We
board,
did that.
the board has expressed interest in
Right.
retaining the
Put it
language,
back
so
in.
let's just bring it back
Right.
and we can discuss it and vote on it, or if necessary, next time.
Great.
Could I recommend any revisions that the board members come prepared to have written, here's the amendment I'd like to propose, so we have it in writing in advance, so
That would be helpful, yes.
we're not writing
Yeah,
language at the
right.
board meeting.
Yep.
Right, and I would go so far as to say, if we don't get it in writing in advance, we probably don't take action at the next meeting, but wait till the meeting after that. Because I just think
That's
we
probably
can do
right,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
And
But
if
we'll
any,
see, we'll see how it
And it's
goes.
not fair to people to
Yep.
do that.
I can just offer too, if any board members that are not part of the policy committee that have a concept that would like assistance with language, to say, okay, I like this, and I can give you the sample language if you need that help as well.
How far in advance will we have the text
What?
Oh, for the- putting this-
of any policy of which you want language?
I think you had
The
it.
question is,
Oh,
if you
you-
have an
well, you-
amendment, bring the language. how far in advance will we get the text so we
Well,
can
There's,
craft the language?
hang on a second, there's no requirement.
Right.
The sooner you bring it forward, the better off we'll be and the more courteous we'll be. So try to bring it
No,
to us.
my question's the other way around. How soon will you get it so I can look at it, so I can know it, so
You
I
have
know?
it now, I think that's what you're asking. All the whole 100006
You have everything.
was sent to you electronically, so
It
you
was.
have it.
Yeah.
And this is it, it's like 40-some, I think it's
Yeah.
42 pages, because I printed it this afternoon, so I have an updated copy, so it's 42 pages. So you have it on your computer right now.
I do.
You got it Friday, last Friday.
Okay.
And
All right,
I'm not,
if-
I'll look for that student line, which is on the
All right, if we could move on.
And when will it be on the agenda?
Next meeting.
Next
The
meeting.
next meeting, okay. So we have 1, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Actually,
It's
you
not-
have 2 weeks, yeah.
It's not real complicated.
This one is not, this is one that's not that complicated. The legislative advocacy conference, Terry and Jennifer?
You want to start? No.
Sure. I brought presents. So, start with that.
Let me get something to read.
Yeah, right? Jennifer and I were at this conference on Saturday, and on my way out the door, I scooped up extra folders from what was available, because I found the conference very valuable, including the fact that the conference folders had some worksheets. So just briefly to draw your attention to a few of the things, you're not doing it tonight, just letting you know. The kinds of things that were included in the Legislative Advocacy Conference, just broadly giving you the 30-second overview of it. There, in the day-long seminar, there were legislators from both parties who came to talk about their position on particular bills being brought forward. Not to get into the minutia of that, but that was a significant part of the agenda. There was also a significant amount of time dedicated to a presenter who was a faculty member at UW Oshkosh, talking about accountability and how accountability might be measured or determined by boards. That was an interesting presentation. And then the last thing, which I wanted to specifically draw your attention to, there are some worksheets specifically designed for groups within school boards, such as our community and governmental relations committee that we have, that could help a committee like that do its work. So there was one handout to map out a 2-year calendar of engagement activities. There's another handout to map your community in terms of the stakeholders and influencers. There's another handout specifically as a to-do list for things your school board can do to engage with your legislators. And I thought all these things were really great task lists and to-dos, and you can just run with it right now. So I just wanted to bring extra copies back, because then you get the nice lovely color logo of the WASB stuff. But if there are any additional questions, I wanted to bounce it to Jennifer to say same stuff.
Thank you. There are a couple of points I would like to pull apart just a little bit, and that is Dr. Michael Ford, the faculty from UW Oshkosh, in speaking about accountability, was trying to frame that term and how different factions use it in different ways to mean different things. And so he says everybody wants it, but no one can agree on one definition. Oftentimes people look at school boards as an instrument of accountability within their school districts. And he's saying under current political climates, exterior agents may or may not see school boards as still having a legitimate, as being a legitimate accountability agent. So he's seeing a little shift in how people perceive of our kind of jurisdiction, if you will. So I thought that was very, very interesting. In thinking about how boards can be good advocates, he was looking again nationally, not just at the state of Wisconsin. And one of his takeaways is that highly effective school boards tend to produce student learning, which I think we've heard before, but it was really good to hear again. The other person that was very, very impressive was Bob Lang, the director of the Wisconsin Legislative Fiscal Bureau. And Mr. Rosing, you would love this baby right here. But I have to tell you, he was just captivating, even though, or with 20 pages of digits and spreadsheets and all kinds of awesome stuff, and identifying trends and what's happening economically with our state, and then specifically the impact of that on public education. And everything from revenue sources to where else is the money going, such as a 20% increase and our state's obligation to pay for medical assistance, to pay for transportation, and then the other agendas of trying to reduce property tax, of offering choice in education, and increasing privatization. So he was very articulate at what are those dynamics, as well as the fiscal numbers, and so I greatly appreciated that. I would also like to just name the people who took the time to come and talk to us. So the Dems, the Democrats that came to speak with us were Representative Katrina Shanklin and Representative Sandy Pope. And then the Republicans who came to speak with us were Senator Luther Olson, Representative Jeremy Theisfeld, Representative Joel Kitchens, and Representative Bob Culp. And I greatly appreciated that the questions were consistent with both the morning and the afternoon groups. And then a piece that was very powerful, we were asked each time with a raising of hands, did we support the limits on referendum and revenue sources, that legislation, a yes or no? There were 3 hands, yes, they did support, and everyone else in the room, some 250 school board members, no thank you. And it was a nice, quick, silent, visual way to represent for our legislatures how we're feeling, where we're at. So it was a hustle bustle, very action-packed, wonderful day. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you too for attending. That was a valuable conference.
Susan?
Well, I think the other thing that we also got at the regional meeting was is it the green form that we should continue to talk about is, again, advocacy and government relations through WSB, and that's becoming part of the WSB Legislative Contact Network. Again, understanding that we get this information, but then as a board deciding what we want to do about the information that we receive. And if that's delegated to committee, then there should be some expectation for what you want the committee to do. Do you want a resolution?
Dean?
I think when we had the discussion, Jared, if you recall, in putting together our plans, our needs, our concerns, our problems, and that sort of thing, there's a point in time where we need to put that FAQ, those frequently asked questions, and our data together to debate the point on a referendum. And I could get Bob Lang to come here and do that. He's done that for school boards. He's very effective in helping translate the state scene that she was discussed here into these terms, and his position is so respected. He's been through every combination of legislative authority over what 40 years anyway, that he could put it in the context that will and legitimate that sort of thing for us as before we go to a referendum.
Okay. Before we move on to the next item, which is the long-range facilities planning, should we take a 5-minute recess?
Sure.
Please. Sorry about the delay. I know it's been a little longer than we anticipated, but let's take 5 minutes. Long-range facilities planning committee update.
All right, I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Jared and Jeff. The document you have on board docs is an excerpt of a piece that was in the actual the plan that was developed by the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. And so with that, I think hopefully this will kind of bring together all the work. We've had a lot of things going on separately. The long range talked about grade configuration. In the meantime, we're talking about operational, a short-term, long-term budget. And this is why we want to have that discussion about grade configuration, so that when we know where we're going, if we're going to be looking at some of these short-term and over the next few years, things that we need to deal with in each of the buildings, we need to know what is the use of those buildings going to be in the future, and will any of these perhaps have an impact if the grade configuration might change in some of the buildings. So even though we don't have a final plan, adopted or voted on by the board, the discussion that we've had is still really helpful. I think, so hopefully the board members have a good enough comfort level with, you know, those different options and where we might be going, so that when you do have to make some decisions about these items and the capital projects, we can make informed decisions about how that's going to impact the future. So I don't know if we necessarily need the final plan, as long as we know the direction we're going on some of these. And some of these aren't going to matter, you know, one way or another. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jared and Jeff to be able to talk through in more detail this actual report and what it might mean and what kind of decision making we're going to have ahead of us.
Question now, we use the word maintenance and long-term maintenance.
Yeah.
And now you're using the term capital. Is this different than the maintenance list that the committee got earlier?
No, it's the same.
It's
the same.
Yeah.
It's the same list,
Right.
just formatted differently.
Yeah. And maybe as we get through this, and Jared also can explain the difference in budgeting as far as capital projects and the different funds and so on, and you know, sort of how we pay for these sorts of things and what the options are as well.
So as Dan had alluded to, is, you know, obviously as we work through the grade configuration and we talk about long-range facility planning, one of the things that the long-range facility committee did is they walked through each of the buildings. At the same time as we walked through each of the buildings, C.G. Schmidt was walking through the buildings as well, prior to Jeff getting here and doing analysis of, you know, what are some of those maintenance needs that we need to do for our buildings. You know, a district our size, you know, typically when you look across the state, you know, has a maintenance budget for those ongoing capital budgets or maintenance budgets between that $500,000 to $750,000, and that's how we, you know, look at replacing roofs, replacing windows, keeping sidewalks up to date. Now there are always those big major projects like some of them that are identified here that just in a normal year in Fund 10 having a maintenance budget's not going to meet those because they're 1.2 million or, you know, $3 million. But, you know, we're looking at a maintenance budget of, you know, $250,000. So, you know, as we walk through this report, you know, our buildings are in good condition. However, there are things that are becoming more deferred maintenance. You know, one of the things that you'll see in here is, you know, Winnequa being one of our older buildings and just the type of plumbing that they have. Over time, you know, you just need to replace those types of things. The unit vents that are at Winnequa, you know, we went through a McKinstry project with phase 3, and we replaced that at Cottage Grove. We replaced it at the same time because we were bringing in the air conditioning. However, you know, at Winnequa, we're coming to the end of life of those unit vents, so they're going to become louder and they're going to become noisier, and we're going to replace those. However, when you look at the overall budget that we have, you know, we only have, you know, about $250,000 to $300,000 annually that we're putting into that. So what this report is doing is the first page of it gives you a summary by building, by urgent need, things that, you know, we believe are a safety issue, things that we need to take care of as soon as possible. Obviously, you know, some of it will get done now, some of it we might have to defer till next year. But then we look at a 2 to 5 year, 6 to 10 years, and then 10 plus years, broken up by school. And so this also will lead into that conversation of the short and long-term budget, because when we're talking about potentially going for a, you know, referendum to build a new building and doing maintenance on buildings, that might be, you know, a year out, 2 years out, you know, that hasn't been decided. However, as we talk about a potential operational referendum, there are things in here that when we look at our Fund 10 budget, you know, when we're looking at only a $250,000, $300,000 maintenance budget, and when we look at just the first 2 columns here, you know, we're close to $6 million over 5 years that we could really be spending here. And so, you know, you look at maybe taking and adding some of that money into putting that into our budget, so we have that as an ongoing, it's earmarked, we tell that to individuals that this is what we're looking at doing. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeff, and he'll talk a little bit about some of those high-level things that are making the dollar amounts increase, or why they're so large, and then some of the things that he's running into now of things that, you know, are on that list that are 2 years that we're starting to see, giving us those warning signs that, you know what, yes, you're going to do it. You know, and I believe, you know, not being here, I've only, you know, for a short period of time, I mean, I think the history of the district has been, when we needed new roofs, we went to referendum. You know, and so we never had a budget that was built around having a stable maintenance program that we kept putting money in. We always, took a large amount of projects and brought it to referendum, did those, paid those down, and then came back and did a few more. So the purpose of tonight was just to walk through this and this, pulling it out, and as the report will show you, there'll be numbers, and if you refer back to your binder, there's pictures in your binders of what it looks like. So, Jeff?
Sure. Thank you very much. Like Jared said, just in a short period of time I've been here, I've really researched this quite a bit and feel that it's pretty well done. I feel that the majority of things have been identified. Like Jared said, a lot of them have been identified on maybe a higher level instead of a real day-to-day level. The things that we're seeing on a day-to-day level are starting to creep up, and we're going to start seeing the things in the urgent needs column, the $552,000, we're already behind on. Every year that these things continue to get deferred, we're continuing to defer and defer, which is only putting us back to where we're starting to Band-Aid things instead of do things in the right manner. The thing that you've got to look at is, in regards to that, is some of these things that we're talking about could impact a school day, which I think ultimately for my goal is to make sure that that never happens. My job is to make sure that school goes, the snow is cleared, that we can get kids to school, that, the roofs are not leaking, that all the toilets are working, cafeteria is working, it's clean, those type of things. That's starting to catch up a little bit. You've got some very new buildings, and in respect to those newer buildings, you're starting to see things get to a point where you're at a replacement on some of those things. I mean, Glacial Drumlin School, for example, you've got heat pumps, 100 and some heat pumps. Those are at a point where a portion of those are going to need to be changed out within that next 2 to 5 years. The number on that just alone is, you're looking at basically $1 million in that 2 to 5 year period to change those out over that period of time. You're starting to look at parking lots. Your structure externally, be the fact that we're in the Midwest with the salt and things that occur. There hasn't been a lot done in some of those areas, as far as we're not even keeping up with the seal coating and striping on some of these where we're getting behind. Your gym floors in some of the buildings we haven't done, that should be done probably on a semi-annual basis in some of the buildings. And then the high school, which is going to get a heck of a lot more use, should probably be done on an annual basis. Winnequa and Cottage Grove are probably the two biggest ones, where I feel that there could be situations that could occur any day. We've got a pipe situation at Winnequa right now that's going to be repaired the day before Thanksgiving, that has been temporarily repaired, but it's a hot water pipe, 4-inch hot water pipe that could burst, and we caught it at that point. So we're able to do that on that day. When I talk about impacting a school day, fortunately we're off that day, because you have to shut the water down on a situation like that. So we have no one around, so we're going to be okay with that. But those are the things that are starting to occur. Some of the leaking roofs, we've addressed those, patched them, but patches are only going to go for so many years because of, once again, the environment that we're living in. So if this schedule that you see here, I would just suggest that as we start to continue to have these talks for any type of referendum, you've really got to keep this in the back of your mind. My gut feeling on what I've been involved with to this point is there's got to be money put into an O&M budget that's going to allow us to make strides on this, because it's it's further, by deferring you only get further into debt, and in a couple ways. You've got to remember too that your construction costs are only going to continue to increase. So some of these things you want to package so that if you've got somebody at a site, they're doing similar work and you're doing it all at one time. going back to Winnequa, the other thing is, like Jared mentioned on the univents, those are in real bad shape. Those are at a point where we're fabricating some of the replacement parts. We can't buy parts. So, you know, we're at a point where fortunately the contractors that we're dealing with have been able to pull some of these things together to make them work, but, you know, we're doing it, you know, kind of on a dime, per se. You know, we definitely at Winnequa and Cottage Grove, you've got problems with windows, you know, and doors, which are definitely a factor as far as we're running into some things on some door frames where they're rusting out. And, you know, that's a situation for what the cost is, you know, $5,000 to $6,500 to replace a door frame. You know, that's all well and fine, but if that's also a section of the building that you're looking at having to do other repairs to, you're making that investment at that time for that improvement, and maybe in 2 to 3 years you may be yanking that whole thing out and redoing that section of the building. So we're at that point of sinking money into some things that we may end up having to, you know, take out, and, you know, basically have lost that investment on the asset at that point. So as I mentioned, as you go forward, just really kind of go back and look at this as a reference, because I do feel it's a very good document. I feel it's got things very well identified, but I think you're at a very crucial point on those urgent needs and the things that are in that 2 to 5 year period. Because of what this time frame is going to take to get this in the works, you know, we're buying another year, you know, as far as letting some of these things go. So I kind of hope that was just a real brief overview of a very extensive document. But the document is very, you know, when you sit down and look at it, I mean, anytime you get a document, you're looking at this going, you know, who wants to read through all this? But I think if you do it in bits and pieces when you're going around to a school and, you know, take and go through and look at some of these things, even before going into the building, I think it'll raise your awareness of some of the things that you need to be aware of when you walk in that door of those buildings. And then, you know, at any time you've got any further questions on it, you know, I'd be more than happy to give you a little bit more detail on some of the things that we're encountering and experience on a day-to-day level. Our staff has done a very good job of band-aiding things, and like I said, making sure that we're meeting our goal of not impacting the school day. That's been the key.
Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out how to frame this the best. Are we at a place where our yearly or biennial allotment for maintenance needs to go up just generally? So we need to be at a 354 or a 4, you know, whatever
Yes.
that amount might be, in addition, even aside from a referendum situation?
I would say yes. I would say that you should look at, the other thing that you know, I would suggest, and Jared and I have talked about, is really you need to have that O&M budget of, you know, maybe that $500,000 to $750,000 annually. But also I think what we've got to do, because on the security side of things, you know, we've got 3 elementary schools that don't even have security cameras in. And we need to probably budget X amount of dollars from a security standpoint that sets aside that we can now start a security phased in process of what we want to do. You know, definitely the cameras is the #1 thing. There's doors, additional doors that need card access. We need to do some programming. We're working with some of the challenges that we've had with the change from Stanley to Honeywell, some of those things, to get those worked out so that we can, you know, make the most efficient use of the systems that we have in place, but also then provide the level of security that I think, you know, this community would like to see. The steps have been started, but we're kind of like, you know, making very minor steps forward, and we're not seeing that. So to answer your question, I would say that you'd have to look at $500,000 to $750,000 annually to fund that. I mean, you can see those numbers. Those numbers definitely, that $552,000 of the urgent needs, I think is probably a very good number to look at it on an annual budget number.
And my follow-up question, I heard you speak to let's prioritize what's going to keep the kids and teachers in the buildings as much as possible, so I appreciate that criteria. Are we at a place where every single one of our buildings has an emergency or, you know, a challenging situation potentially?
No.
Or just
No, I would say, yeah.
the ones that you mentioned?
Yeah, I'd say Winnequa, Cottage Grove, you know, your newer buildings are, those things are not at an urgent need. They're in that 2 to 5, 3 to 6 range. So, I mean, they're going to catch up on us. But, you know, if we don't go ahead and work on the Cottage Grove and the Winnequas, then that's only going to defer and backload on what those costs are going to be. So, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, we see this as, you know, we've got to get this money operationally back to a point and catch up to get to where we need to go in and then have this budgeted plan of moving forward. You know, ultimately, we've got, like for roofs. Roofs are, you know, major expenditures. We've got a plan for roofs, and we're not sitting too bad right now. But when we get into 2016, 2017, now we've got to start the cycle again of replacing those. So you're looking at there, you know, depending on the size of the roof or the section of the roof, you know, anywhere from 500,000 to 800,000 of replacing those. So, you know, just giving you that idea, we're not that far away from having some very major expenditures. We've also got, when we talk about those things, the cooling tower at Taylor Prairie, that's about a $35,000 cost in the next 2 to 5 years. The high school, that's a chiller on that unit that was undersized when that was put in or when the additions were done, whatever, I don't know what the history was, but that's going to be in the next 2 to 5 years, that's $360,000 to replace that. Otherwise, you're talking about buildings that you're not going to have air conditioning in. We're doing some work, you know, right now on the, and this is an example of that, on the chiller at Taylor Prairie to fix some things internally. It's starting to leak, so we're going to have to do some coating to that. That's to the tune of $11,000 just for that work alone. So we're going to sink $11,000 into something that, you know, probably within the next 2 to 5 years needs to be replaced at $35,000. So now you've got an investment of $46,000 into really, you know, what should be a $35,000 project. So those are the things that are starting to happen that, you know, I think we've got to be well aware of. And like I said, you know, our goal is to make sure that, you know, we don't have these things impact, you know, the school day, and provide the environment that, you know, we have the equipment for and what we're providing right now. But we run into one of these glitches somewhere along the line, we've got, you know, to look at contingency plans of doing things. Or, you know, even if you turn around and go ahead and, you know, have to, you know, deficit spend, you're still, what concerns me is these are not planned for. These are unforeseen type of mechanical issues that can occur where we get a call, you know, on Monday morning and it's 20 below zero that we've got an issue with some of these univents, and now we're disrupting that school day and we're trying to fix something at a point in time that, you know, could take that whole week of, you know, going into certain classrooms and working on these things. So you know, and I understand, you know, we're all going to be in this together as far as, you know, the parents complaining and all those things, and rightfully so. But, you know, those are the unforeseen things that I think we've got to be prepared to address. And I think we're still ahead of it, but not for long in some of these. We're definitely on borrowed time.
Carrie?
I had an easy question and a hard question.
Okay.
So the easy one first. When you were talking just a minute ago, you used a term that I just didn't know. You said something about at Winnequa, the univents, and I immediately went to HVAC, but I didn't know exactly. Can you just explain to me what the univent is?
Sure.
And
A univent is the thing, yeah,
It blows
that you
up.
see in each classroom,
Uh-huh.
and that's what's providing the heating and cooling off of a two-pipe system.
And what's wrong with it right now?
Uh,
At Winnequa?
Pretty much everything.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, you know,
Is it gonna
blower-
catch fire? Is it gonna blow up? I was just
Blower
curious.
motors, you know, we had a situation there 2 weeks ago where the blower motor was making so much volume and noise that, you know, it was very difficult for the teacher to teach. So we get the gentleman in there from Honeywell. He works on it. He does what he can, shoots quite a bit of oil in it to try and lubricate it. Goes to try and get the part, can't get the part. So he had to then fabricate, you know, the rods and everything that that thing operated off of, so that the part he could get, he could make work in there. So, you know, fortunately we got the contract with Honeywell that we're not paying, you know, labor on that because of that maintenance contract. That's the other thing, is we have a, you know, this maintenance contract, and maintenance contracts are good in the situation we're in now at 2 buildings. The other buildings, you know, we could probably reevaluate on, you know, what that expenditure is, because if we got things up to where they needed to be, you know, then we could work on probably a little better contract as far as with a vendor, a contractor, that we're agreeing to a rate, but we're not paying them X amount of dollars annually for this kind of work. And we're starting to even step outside of that, like on this cooling tower at Taylor Prairie. That work is outside that contract because the equipment can't be maintained anymore. It's got to be rebuilt or refurbished in different ways. So there's expenditures that we're starting to incur now that we could be avoiding because we haven't been staying ahead on preventative maintenance.
That leads to my second part, which was the harder part. I worked in the residence halls on campus for 11 years, and we had a huge physical plant, a lot of buildings, and a lot of, I think, fabulous staff there. So my harder question is, are we staffed in a way, do you believe, that allows us to stay on top of the maintenance things and the daily things so that they're, I don't know, being managed in the way you'd like to see?
Sure.
And then the second part of that is, if you look at the volume of work that needs to be done, should we be thinking about some in-house staffing labor, or is really the best practice to get contracts from outside people to do everything for us that needs to be done?
Yeah.
Layperson's
No,
terms for
that's-
me to get my head around that.
That's a very good point, because probably within the next month I'll be bringing something forward to you on maintenance
Okay.
and cleaning. Like I said, I think our staff does a very good job as far as our maintenance people and, you know, the in-house staff that we have. I think there's a good balance. They can do a lot of things, and they are doing a lot of things, but we're to the point where we're talking very specialized type of, you know, trade, you know, things that have to be done. Our guys are doing a great job as far as preventative maintenance, but in some situations we're beyond the preventative maintenance because the equipment is worn out. Cleaning wise, which I think is an impact on these buildings, we're not doing a very good job. We've evaluated that, and we'll be bringing something forward to you to hopefully correct that. Staffing levels, cleaning wise, we're evaluating that, and we'll have some information for you. Maintenance wise, I think we are doing a pretty good job and are well enough staffed if we get things to where they need to be that we can maintain and provide preventative maintenance to.
Cleaning means custodial?
Yes. Yes, on the cleaning end, yes.
I have
That answer that?
Dean?
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a long list here. I read through about half of it and looked at it, and it's this is compiled by C.G. Smith based on their walkthroughs on mechanical and structural types of things. Are you trusting to this document, or have you looked at it yourself, or haven't you had time to do it yet,
No.
or not? Because I'm going to begin to be skeptical when the people who want to do all this work hand me the
Are the
list.
same people, I understand,
And
yeah.
I mean, it could be front-end loaded.
Right. I've got a lot of things tabbed, so I've been through it, I feel, pretty thoroughly, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I've had quite a bit of experience in working with construction managers. I'm dealing with C.G. Smith on some things that they've identified here. on a smaller level, and as a result of that, I feel I'm getting a pretty good feel of how they operate, and if they're a partner with us, or if they're in business to do things.
You've defined my question.
I don't want to give an opinion on that yet, but I understand, my job is to work in the best interest of the district, and I feel very strongly in that, in my role. And Jared and I have had some conversations on some of the people that we're working with and what we're getting for our money. And that's why we're evaluating some of the current contracts that we have and seeing how we can do better.
So if you haven't gone through all of these, you're going to look at them yourself, and as we set priorities, you suggest perhaps getting better estimates.
Yeah,
that would be here.
Yes, and I feel very comfortable on a lot of these things that are in that urgent or the 2 to 5 year with our staff who've been maintaining these things, of getting their feedback. They've been very valuable. I mean, we're even going as far as like going back to this cooling tower at Taylor Prairie. We're not too sure, or at least I'm not too sure, that there has to be chemical treatment on that water going through that unit to make sure that we're getting the balances and we're not scaling the thing up and all that. I'm not too sure the contract we had for that was working to what we were paying for. So that's being evaluated right now. And as a matter of fact, we're meeting tomorrow with a competitor to get some other pricing on that.
Susan?
I just wanted to remind us that we did have a very trusted local person from our committee walk through with C.G. Schmidt, and he went through this whole list and tagged things, and I think gave that to you. So we do have some corroborating evidence from that person too.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I know
just
that
wanted to
was
remind you, I
done
don't know if
too.
you remember that he had done that, because
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was very valuable. He spent a lot of time on it.
Good.
Has he worked with you folks?
Yeah, he hasn't had the committee member or the community member now. I've not introduced him to Jeff.
But he turned all his stuff over to you.
Oh, okay.
And that's one thing, obviously when we look at the dollar value, this is obviously C.G. Smith's coming in and using their best professional judgment, which obviously any projects that we would work through, we would go through our bidding process that we have, or however we decide to move forward as a district. But when we look at the items, we concur, and with our staff, we concur that these are items that we need to be addressing. So, when you look at the dollar amounts, we don't believe that they're too high or too low. I mean, these are dollar amounts that, they're just estimates, but we have went through and we don't think, well, do we really need to do a parking lot in 2 to 5 versus a 6 to 10? Are we looking at a seal coating situation or a complete redo of the parking lot? So as we walk through those, we feel that those items have been addressed correctly, and then obviously the dollar amount would be something that as we move forward. And then as we look at, like Jeff had mentioned, that if we're looking at doing something at Winnequa, we might focus on Winnequa, and as the construction crews are already there, getting them to do other things, which then lowers the prices naturally, because we're not having 2 crews on or different things like that.
I just get suspicious when I see numbers that end up in odd figures at the last figure, like 4s and 7s and things like that, because I know no one can get that close.
Get that precise, yeah.
All right.
So yeah, but I mean, this overall thing here just gives us, and it's all of our buildings that we own, and it includes Maywood, and it includes the district office in Nichols, so as we start breaking things down, just look at the second column, we might not be at that 5.5, because we might say, since in the relationship we are with Maywood, there's certain things that we don't have to do. But you notice that in 10 plus years, we've talked about possibly using Maywood again. But as we talk about grade configuration and we talk about different things, we might be back in. I mean, there's, all those types of things we can't rule out. So that's why we wanted to present this as an overall. And as we start walking through them, the district will have to prioritize how we move forward.
What's our current maintenance budget?
We're just short of $300,000.
So bump it up by a couple $100,000.
Yeah, we would like to,
Double it.
yeah, we should really double it to be into that area. We compete. But we also understand that there's a lot of.
Right.
No, really?
Surprise, right?
I think
Jeff?
we really wanted C.G. Schmidt to be overly not cautious, but to really bring us everything, right?
Comprehensive, right?
Yeah, I
They
mean,
were-
not like,
Right.
you know, I don't want to, you know, I have problems with a lot of contractors, I like them guys, whatever, but I think we really wanted them to overdo it,
Yes.
right? And then, so we could pare it down a little.
Yeah, I think it's a very good
Yeah.
comprehensive document,
Mhm.
and it's, you know, identified things. You know, I think as we talk, you know, what my suggestion would be is, you know, as we kind of understand, you know, financially what direction we're gonna go and what we can budget, you know, that's then when we sit down and really, you know, I don't wanna say put the screws to somebody, but, you know, tighten them down and say, all right, what are we really looking at here? You know, what type of contingency do you need on this? You know, what are the issues? Because, you know, my experience with construction projects, they'll come in with this, and a lot of this, they've got contingency built in there of, you know, 10%, 8 to 10%, which is a very inflated number if they're doing their job. If they're doing their job, that means then when we bid that, there shouldn't be unforeseens. I mean, you know, I know fortunately you don't have asbestos here, so we're in good shape that way, because that always used to be a big one, that, you know, you break through a wall and they find asbestos. Well, my argument used to be, you know what, you bid that job, you should have looked on the other side of that wall. You know, don't come running to us now that you're gonna need more money. That's something, that's part of you doing business now that you got the job. You know, things though that, you know, would fall onto us that, you know, I think where this is probably a little bit liberal is, you know, a lot of times you can't see what's on the other side of walls or what's up above ceilings, and they don't do that because of the time frame it takes. But when we get ready, if we know that the next 2 to 3 years, these are the projects that we're gonna go ahead and move forward with because of how we prioritize them, that's when we get somebody out here that's gonna start climbing up there, finding those things, so that when they give us a number, we've got a number that we're bringing to you, and a number that when we go to bid it, better be in that range. Because the other thing, and, you know, hopefully a good construction manager is gonna be the person that's gonna sit down and analyze that and turn around and say, all right, we've got somebody that's at $500,000 or somebody else that bid at 400. Why is there a $100,000 difference in there? Analyze that, come back to us, tell us where that's at. Because, you know, somebody may have forgot something. I've had, you know, situations where they pulled their bid when you start asking those questions of, did you remember this? Did you realize that, you know, the thickness is gonna be this? So the material you've got, and, you know, you pin them down so that when they sign that contract, that's the number you're working with, and you don't have cost overruns as a result of that.
Jennifer?
Here goes the newbie. There were not many items, but there were a tiny few items that I thought, hey, I wonder if our community might help us out. Is that ever appropriate? So for instance, in our family and consumer sciences, might it be appropriate to ask for appliance donations? Throwing that out there. And I know it's, you know, it's like this much money, but like, I don't know, like, I'm asking, because I don't know what do we do? What's the culture of that?
I mean, I think that's things that as you look across the state, school districts do it in both ways. I think it comes back to what our policy says as a district. And, you know, I know that, you know, we have some groups that are very active in going out, and I'll use, you know, Winnequa PTO is very, you know, trivia night and buying, you know, getting funds to buy technology. That definitely helps it.
Right.
I think when we get to the high school level, it becomes a little different because they don't really, I mean, they have their parent group, but
Yeah.
it's not as active as,
Right.
you understand how that works.
I do.
But, you know, and so those are the types of things, it's just that philosophy with the district, and then it comes into the part of, okay, yes, I'm willing to donate as a business, but what are those type of corporate, what do I get if I do that? And I don't think we're there as a district yet, you know, but I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it, but I think that as a district, what our philosophy would be, I think we still have to have that solid conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Susan?
I think that goes back to that area that we've worked on forever, and this is a more global concept, but it's sponsorships. You know, and it's all those kinds of questions, and I think those are bigger global board questions that at some point we need to look at, and that is, you know, do we have naming opportunities? Do we accept those kind of donations? Do we, I mean, those are all the big questions
Sounds familiar.
that we've been asking, but.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
The-
So, yeah, it does sound familiar. So, and we've studied it in policies, and but we haven't moved forward on any of this. I think, when Mr. Lucier walks in and says, I'd like to build you a new gym, we say, okay, we'll write a policy, yeah. If you have somebody in mind, let us know. Well.
I'm just asking what our structure is, so.
Dean?
Have you folks collectively looked at this and cost out this? And is this, well, let me ask it this way. This appears to be things that have to be done at the schools regardless of our grade configuration, in most part. There's some of this stuff that might vary if you have different grade levels. But one of the aspects of a referendum, it seems to me, is not only stuff here, but an ongoing maintenance budget as well. Is this what you're looking forward to now, at this point?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I think, the next agenda item, we continue that discussion about our long, short-term budget. I think we absolutely have to come up with a number that we just talked about earlier. What should our maintenance budget be, every year? And that's something that definitely should tie into that discussion about referendum. It's one thing to do certain projects separately, but just that ongoing budget number that we can manage, that's what we need to figure out. What's the number that we want to shoot for, and it's critical that it gets increased. The question is, can we increase it enough, and how?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, this is a good baseline. What I'm doing now is I'm working with each building, because what this does not include, and we seem to kind of let these things fall by the wayside and forget, and then, then it's like, once again, from a budgetary standpoint of the operating dollars, this does not include like new cafeteria tables, new classroom desks, whether they need new scoreboards or new backboards or new bleachers or those type of things. So I'm working with each school now to get that, to put it into this criteria. I don't know if we'll have the costs, but we can at least bring that forward, so you're going to see, what we're seeing with, working with the building administration of the things that they feel they need, once again, to do, their job day to day from an educational standpoint. And those things are, you start talking about cafeteria tables, that's a pretty big ticket item. I mean, you're talking that $4,000 to $5,000 range, and, if that, I think, will help make the decisions on, what we're talking about as far as an annual budget number again. Because we're going to know that in 2 to 3 years, we're going to have to get all new cafeteria tables, or, we're going to have to redo a couple of scoreboards at the high school or things like that. Because, like I said, right now it seems to be reactive instead of proactive on these things. So we'll work on that, and, as this document continues to progress along with, the process here, I think we can give you more detail, too, of a comprehensive plan.
Susan?
Jared, what's our current maintenance budget and our current capital budget, annual?
So our current maintenance / capital, because that's all the way that we've done it, all sort of merged together, is just shy of that $300,000.
How much?
$300,000.
Okay. Because I know
now, that doesn't include cleaning supplies, because that's all separate. But that, when we talk about bringing your summer capital projects and what we're pulling money out of to fix the ventilator, the lights, then thank you, getting late.
It is. I agree. That's why I know as well.
Yeah.
We throw univents around like we know what we're talking about.
So, that's where we're at. So that's why we talk about doubling it too.
So it's what I'm hearing from Jack, that minimally we need to increase that annual budget amount from 300,000 to 500,000.
I heard you say
Minimally
6 or
500,
7.
but we should be at 6 to 700. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And even that won't really,
it won't get everything done right away. We'll have to, and we'll, probably do some, financing, like the big project. But then, like some of those roof projects, we'll probably have to, if we're at that referendum stage of a new building, you can always ask those,
Okay.
But it's also how much can our community and how much can our budget afford?
Dean?
Does this include most things except roof?
This actually includes roof.
Yeah, it does.
It includes roof. Well, when I do the math here, just simply, if you had $600,000 a year and you multiply it by 5, you get in 5 years you're almost meeting these other goals here if you multiply them out by 5 and 10 years, right?
Yep. And like when we talk about the road projects, like some of the road projects are like 1.2 million, and you only get 6, so that's why we would have to split that over 2 years, and that would be the major, or going to a separate question on that right now.
Susan?
So, Jared, have you, when we look at that sheet that you gave us, like last week, it shows the budget deficit for the next 5 years. To minimally get to 600,000, we'd have to add 300,000 to that budget deficit.
Yes.
Okay, so I think it'd be helpful
And
for
that's-
us, when we have that, to take that sheet and then put in paren
Yeah.
300,000 minimally, or 4, whatever you think the budget, so that you can see that as we're having the discussion about where we need to go. So, and if we come up with, and we should build it so that we can see that. So there may be other large expenses like that. So maybe Lisa's gonna come in and say, I have $100,000 budgeted for curriculum every year, but with the new technology we're putting in here, I really need 2 for the next 10. Just major amounts like that, not little ones, but ones that are gonna change things from 850,000 to 1.2.
I'll say that that's the exact discussion we need to have. Tonight, on the next agenda item, I'd like to pick up where you just left off.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, short and long-term budget.
So,
Budget.
great prelude there, Susan. That's exactly what we want to do. And I think that's when we look at next steps, okay? So Jared last week gave you a lot of historical data, and we're going to continue to work on that and put it into documentation that we can not only, for you as board members, that we can share publicly and to really tell our story about, why do we have an $850,000 deficit this year. And then we look at what our real needs are. We get into actual discussion about, a possible operating referendum. I think that's got to be the starting point of, I would suggest that we look at what we really need, and then we can talk about, okay, what can the community support? But, start with the idea, we know we have an $850,000 hole now. We know we need at least $300,000 added onto that for the capital projects, if not more. We have other areas, like, Susan mentioned curriculum. The board hasn't talked about that yet, but we'll be prepared to discuss that also. I'll just anecdotally right now, let you know, and a couple of our board members I had this discussion with, but you all need to hear this. Textbooks, okay, and resources. And nowadays, it's not just textbooks, but additional other types of resources. If you recall, a year ago, the board approved 4 new courses: 3 science AP courses, physics, biology, and chemistry, and then the personal finance course. Well, those new courses also need new textbooks and supplies that go with them. So we only implemented one of them this year, the AP Physics. That was about $40,000 just for the textbook and supplies. And then next year we have 2 more AP courses to implement. Our textbook budget for the district right now is about $100,000. So $40,000 of it got eaten up right there. The year before we spent all of it on our reading curriculum. And then we have other needs. We've got plenty of other departments that have outdated, resources. So there's another area that exactly, we have about $100,000 now. We need to get you a number, but easily we probably should be, closer to $200,000 to $300,000 annually on that piece. So that's another, 100 to 200 that we could add on to our deficit that we really should have. Now, again, how we do that and whether you go for that in a referendum or not, something we need to talk about. But that's what I'd like to do. Next step is that we come back administratively with that more precise list of what should our budget look like. And then from there we can start talking about, okay, how much do we really need, or how much can we continue deferring, and so on. So that's kind of the big picture piece.
Jennifer?
Is the progress on the teacher compensation plan in that soup as well?
I think it needs to be. And that's something we need to talk about as well. Where does that fit in? And,
Okay.
Absolutely. And it all compensation, salary and benefits for teachers and support staff, all rolls into that, absolutely. Yeah. And, well, of course, not only for their existing staff, what are our actual staff needs? We've talked a lot about class size and other support areas. I guess what I'd like to do is go with the approach of coming back to, well, here's what we really believe that we should have to have optimal learning, opportunities for our students. And then, where does that differ from where we're at right now? What if we did have an open checkbook? What would we really think that we could, need for our student needs? And we've talked about specialized programs. You're going to be getting a report soon on gifted and talented. That absolutely is an area we need to expand, and it means more staffing as well. Not only programming in place, but then once we have that programming, the staffing to do that. Where does that go as a priority for us?
And when you do that, would you also talk about whether or not we're meeting the DPI requirements for that?
Absolutely.
Because I know there's a nearby district that got cited and is, can't remember who that was.
Yeah, we don't want to get in that situation. And we want to do it because it's the right
Okay.
thing for kids, but
again,
there is
into
also
the cost. I get it.
yeah,
I get it.
and others, we've talked about reading specialists, interventionists. We don't have any math interventionists. We focused on literacy. Those are all things that we believe that should be helpful. We've also talked about, and you will get a report on the staffing changes you have made over the last couple of years on what our TOSAs and deans and what they're doing, and so you're not going to have all that next month, but we can give you the big picture thing, and that'll be a continued conversation here throughout the year.
I really applaud this approach. I think it's excellent. I think you can sell the curriculum stuff, particularly along the lines that we've done. You got to make sure you get staff development, in there. When we're starting to do coaching and mentoring and coaching and TOSAs and that sort of thing, we need to justify that. We're going to have to make that case, because that's not something that Grandma grew up with. And but I think we need to get the whole bundle like you're putting together here, and see where we are, because I think the case can be made in this school district to do it and do it right.
And by the way, one of the reports you're going to get at the next meeting will be from Lisa Hype, and just kind of an overall curriculum instruction department. What are the things we're working on? What is her kind of what you heard from Jeff? What's her evaluation of our instructional programs? What are the needs that aren't being met? What are the things we're doing well? And so we'll have her report first, and they'll lead right into our conversation then about budget as well.
Are you clear on what your next steps are for our next meeting?
I believe so. I guess what I'd like to have is a budget document that outlines basically, I don't know if the recommendations are the right word, but needs, of where we're at, what we would like to have. If we could propose an actual budget that you had that spending authority as a board, what would we propose to you? And then start from there, and then we can talk about priorities within that.
Okay.
So I'd like to have that for you for next
And
meeting.
it seems to me too that is there any kind of a line of progression on special education? Because one of the things that's gone over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's support of that externally has gone from, I keep saying it's from 68% federal and state down to what, 16 or
26 or something. 26? You got it.
Is it 26? Okay. And you must have been just at a conference or something.
I've been hearing that, it's been that way last year, so.
Yeah. Well, it's
always I remember.
and I don't think any of that stuff is going to get less.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and this is something we were talking about earlier today as well. Special needs students, it changes. You can have a family move into the district, and all of a sudden we have additional service delivery needs that we don't necessarily have we can't necessarily accommodate with current staff. It might mean hiring an additional staff member, and in the past, that would kind of be a no-brainer. If we need this to hire an additional EA or even another teacher in mid-year, we would do it. And knowing that there would be some reimbursement with special ed and it's easier to manage. And now we're so tight that we really, have a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions before we make decisions to add staff. We know that it's going to dip, we don't have the money for it. And we still do it if we really have to, but it's.
And I think in this planning too, it would be good to take a look at our class sizes. Because I think we ought to be looking at pushing them down closer to 20 than to 25. We've tended to become complacent and satisfied to kind of be at the upper end of our, I forget what words we use there, but we have a goal and then we have an optimum or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think we ought to be shooting for less than our current goal, because things will only get worse after that.
Yeah.
But it's, I think all those things to make this the very best school district that we can, we need to find out what the, we can always cut back a bit from that, but if we don't have it, it won't be there.
Okay. I agree with that, and I don't have the frame of reference to know how we compare with other districts. My idea of getting close to 20 is just because I think that would be better, but that's a random, so I don't really know how we are compared to Middleton or Waunakee or anything like that.
That's a really good point. I think that's something the board needs to talk about is, we certainly can provide that information. I think the thing we have to be careful of is when you compare, many of those districts have higher class size, but not because they want to, and it's not good for students. They just do it because they're forced to.
Especially students that are 35 and across in Texas and things like that.
And I know plenty of districts in Wisconsin, and ones that you'd consider high achieving, that have elementary classes approaching 30. But because they're just strapped budget-wise and they have to do it, and it's not optimal, and they would get rid of it in a heartbeat if they could. And so to say, well, they're achieving well, it's almost despite that. They, I think you could make the argument they would do better, and with that. But there are some districts that are in that situation. Not so much in the Dane County area, but so we can provide that. But I think we have to be careful when we look at those comparables. Just I think we should really look at what do we think we need to educate our
I would
kids.
prefer comparables based on, like you said, high achieving districts, or what best practice maybe is even a better way to think about it. Because I don't have that in my mind. What would be the best thing that we could be doing?
Yeah.
I think in addition to number size, and I'm just saying kind of the obvious, it's also important to know how many parent volunteers are there and on what consistent basis, and then how many EAs are available and on what consistent basis. And then also what interventions and enrichments are offered. So there's a number, and then there are multiplying factors that can actually make that possible. So is it truly one adult with 30 children, and that's it? That's really different than some of the other, and I know that some places are, like, that's it. So anyway, I think teasing out that other stuff is important.
The spillover on that, Carrie, I think when you want to deal with the selling of this referendum, I think you want to get people to have, to want to vote because you want the best and not the average of the comparable.
Yeah.
Although you need that data to be able to answer negative questions and so forth. But I think a little bit of dream is better than often some cold hard fact. Too.
Well, and we did historically we had lower class sizes for a long time, and because we used to staff toward the goal and not toward the higher end of the range. And 6 or so years ago, we started staffing toward the higher end of the range. So I think, it would be worth looking at how many FTEs are we talking about to staff more toward the goal. And we did have, testimony from teachers and from students students at the high school who noticed the increased class sizes. I mean, we've talked about the size of the classrooms that were built at the high school. They're small. And we have science labs that were designed for 24, and we're now, having to put more kids in them. So, I mean, there were kids would come and had to grab a chair from across the hall and bring it in for their class and then put it back at the end because there was, so we've got stuff like that we can talk about. And the research, you can't just rely on the research for it, because it's kind of all over the board, et cetera, at some point, so.
But logic says, the
Right.
lower,
Yeah,
Yeah,
Right.
totally, yeah.
and if we're gonna be a research-based district, we have to use research.
Okay,
Well, the
if you
research
have
isn't gonna
22 in a
help us,
room with a
so-
crappy teacher though,
Right,
you know,
there are other.
you know, I
Yeah.
mean, it's, again, it's,
There are all
there-
kinds of.
But if we have
not that
crappy,
there are any,
if we
but
have crappy teachers, that's,
not in our district.
that's our failing method.
Okay.
But
Just
the
to be
point
clear
about
about
the physical size of the
Hang on.
classrooms
Our
really
teachers
good
are
too.
so
It
great, they
is,
could
and
teach
it's
with
a
40,
release,
right?
and,
Some
West
could.
Berlin's pretty similar.
Some could.
You get big kids.
Depends on how you
Big
teach
ones,
and
some
per
of
subject too.
Okay, we're ready to move on?
We're getting there.
The next item is the board continuous improvement planning. Given the hour, I don't want to, I mean, this, you know, is fairly open-ended, and I don't want to, not this one. Oh, I'm sorry, you know, you're right. That's this one. You have this document. I just want to quickly go through this and then bring it back next time. But just so we see there, what I've done is I've taken the each of those categories and put the item and the score and for that item, and then the average for each group. And if you scroll down, you'll see the ones that are below 2 are in red. And essentially what we want to do is evaluate the priorities of those low scoring ones. And then on here and decide what it is we want to take up. Susan?
I really appreciate that you did that, and actually we've identified those as well, but there's another, I think there's another way to pick up some of these clearly identified items that may add a few more to this, and then we can decide if we want to prioritize them. But you're going to find out that they are things that we've identified as a group just as strongly as your average does. So one of the examples, let me just find one that's not a 50.
Hang on a second. Why don't you let me finish going through this, and then we can
Okay.
discuss alternatives
Okay.
if we want to. Did you get to the bottom? Are you at the bottom? Let's move on. Okay. What I would like to see is that we just take this offline. People look at this list, look at the red ones, and think about the priority that you would have for those items. And we'll bring that back this time, next time, and be prepared to rank these as order of priority. And ones that have the, I think among these low scoring ones, we'll take, I think my thought is we would take the ones that we, 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever we rank as the highest priorities as a group.
You want to,
Okay, Susan
Okay.
first.
So for instance, let me just show you a good example. So under culture, because there were no percentages under 2, Peter identified nothing. So if you, interesting enough, I think the other factor, let's look at number 7 in that group, which is on page 2, last one on page 2. It says, we focus on strategic decisions and policy issues rather than the administrative implementation of policy on the data. Okay, so that was not identified, not prioritized. What's interesting about that particular one, and this is the way I pulled it, and we matched a lot, almost always, but if you take 80% or greater of the ones that are partially or not at all, and most of those have zeros in the accomplished section, and you add those percentages together and you get 80 or plus, that's saying 80% of our feeling is that we really aren't doing that. So that's another important way to identify this. I started at 50, doing it at 50%, and I seem to be pulling up more than we probably really wanted to deal with. But clearly, you look at 50%, the one just above that, we value differences of opinion and do not let them degenerate into personality conflicts. Fully achieved 0, mostly achieved 3 out of 7, and then 56% of us, or 4, or a majority, said, this is just barely partially achieved, or not achieved at all. And I think that's a very clear statement of something that we at least need to identify, put on the list and say, do we want to prioritize that right now? And, maybe we can simply do it by firming up board norms. I don't know. And maybe the easiest way, what you do is you just go through and you look at the percentages for partially achieved and not achieved, circle those two and add them together. And again, you'll see a lot of those match. So Peter identified, we benchmarked test results against districts with similar demographics and prior performance. We know we don't do that. Somebody said mostly achieved. We don't do that. Partially achieved, 5 of 7 said it's not achieved or even started. So it supports Peter's identification piece, but I think it missed some really critical areas. So if you want me to give you that additional list on each section, and if you want me to go to the 80%, I can do that too. But I'll tell you, all of those at 50 or more are zeroed out at fully achieved. And usually, to get to the 50, you don't have mostly achieved either. So,
who would like to ask Susan to collate her results and bring those forward at our next meeting and work from that document, or should we start from here?
no, let me just add to yours in blue, and then if you don't want to consider those, you can say no, and we can just take them right back off again.
Susan?
I would agree with that, because I also have gone through them, and if you have, I don't think that averaging these is necessarily the best way to get the key things here. I mean, if you have 3 people saying something's not achieved or started, that's
Then
a
the
flag.
average is low.
It's a flag. So, well, not necessarily, because sometimes you have people rating them high. I mean, I'm just saying if there are real disparate answers, that's another issue. I just don't think you capture everything, and I think it's just worth going through and taking another look at some of these. And I don't, I didn't have time to look at.
Do you think it will make a significant difference to the results?
I don't know, I think it could. I mean, I'm not sure that you captured all the key, most important things with these
Jennifer?
averages, that's all I'm saying.
Pretending that this is a classroom, I would have posters up around the room, and you would get 10 or 15,
Dots.
whatever,
Sure.
and you would get to prioritize
Sure.
as a class, and then collectively we would get to see where the trends were.
Okay.
I
At the
don't know
last
that-
meeting, you guys asked me as a group to collate it this way, and I did
hear
that.
you.
Now you're asking me to do something
Then-
else. It's a little
It's
frustrating.
the like the policy manual, how about that?
I was using
Very interesting.
I was using a process to highlight that all voices are currently not feeling comfortable. I'm
I
not.
understand.
I'm not trying to argue. You
And-
you
and-
did, and I said
And I
thank you.
am opening the
and-
floor for suggestions to how
Yes.
to do this.
So-
And I'm happy, if we want to, if you guys have this suggestion for a different way to rank these, please bring it forward and then decide as a group that that's what we're going to do, and we will go ahead and do that.
If I may
Yes.
finish, I am at times frustrated because the number of votes seems to just be forever, infinitum. And I think at times it helps each of us to have a limit, whether it's 5 or 8 or 10, because it forces you to raise to the top what really matters to you. So I would appreciate
Which is
some
what I
cons-
tried to do here.
Exactly. So
To
I-
narrow it down to the lowest performing. Values.
I'm there, so I would like for us, before we leave tonight, to at least have a parameter, because I really do not want to argue for 3 hours about every tiny detail that does not feel productive. I'm speaking only for myself. I would like a
You can
process.
speak for me.
I would like a process that floats the values to the top, whether it's 5, 8, 10.
Carrie?
Can we
Carrie?
help me?
Yes, and I agree with what she said. I would disagree with what you said as an interpretation, however, when you said, oh, that's what I did. What Jennifer was talking about was not the same as narrowing the number of options, but narrowing the number of votes you can prioritize. And what you said is, yes, I narrowed it down already, but I understood what Susan Manning said, that there may have been in a true, cross-section of this group with 10 votes each, it may have been surprising that both Susan Fox and Susan Manning, and I understand that argument and aligned with that the ones with the disparity might also be interesting to look at, even though the average of people who love it and hate it still
Right.
kept it above the average you picked out. So my observation here is just the disconnect between what she said and what you thought she said, in terms of getting a feel for the group and prematurely narrowing down the number of choices, because I think that would come out if you gave us all the list and a narrow number of votes. I think certain things would rise to the top, because the ones that
Okay.
have really low averages are probably still gonna be ones that people
We
will,
had the-
as opposed to telling people only these are the ones.
We
you can
had the
vote.
list and the entire list, all of the results at our last meeting. And I asked people to consider that
Mhm.
and using that whole basis for a priority to talk about prioritizing it. So we've been down that road. You asked at that time that we collate these and bring them up and summarize this data, which is what I have done.
Super helpful.
We cannot, I mean, if you want to go back to.
I'm ready to vote on these.
If you want to go back to the
It's helpful.
original list from
No,
last
this is
time, we
super
can do
helpful.
that.
I just
Okay.
think that if we were voting, that I shouldn't feel like I can only vote on the ones you've highlighted in red, because I hear what
Sure.
Susan
I
meant.
understand.
So I'm liking
I-
the idea that there's
I
still other
understand.
things being discussed.
Okay, the ones highlighted red are certainly, I certainly highlighted as things that
That's
there
helpful.
is general agreement, not complete agreement with the low scores. So I would just like you to take this list, you can see these averages, come back next week, and let's talk about, I mean, in 2 weeks. Well, let's have a workshop next week. No, come back in 2 weeks. And with being prepared to discuss all these things, and you can suggest, if there's other items on this list that you want to pull forward as they should be priorities, that's fine. And let's pick a couple, then we can get some priorities, get all the priorities on this list.
Can we do the
How many?
exercise that Jennifer mentioned, just as
Sure.
a
Yeah.
starting point? Because if you set that up as a Qualtrics survey with those items and we each got 10 things to pick on, at least that would give you the numbers and see where the spread is of, okay, here's where people are
I
at.
think,
It'd be
right.
pretty easy to do.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the process has to be that complicated.
That's the easiest.
Because I
way.
think that there's going to be pretty.
That's the easiest.
Hang on,
way.
I'm sorry, I mean, I was hoping that we could, with a minimal of
Quickest,
fuss,
too.
fairly quickly pick a couple of priorities off here. I don't
Right
think
on.
that's,
If
I look
quick
at this
is the way to
list,
do it, you give everyone
it
equal votes
doesn't-
and not the
Right.
discussion.
So come
element.
Why
10
don't we
minutes
start
early
and
and
see
put
what
your
happens?
dots up.
What's
That's
that?
not
Okay,
complicated.
how I would
that's
do
fine.
it.
If you're in 5th grade, it's great.
It's an
That's how I
adult
would do it.
process
All right,
that's
fine.
used to prioritize, and you can be as
Okay,
That's how I
we'll
would
bring
silly as
that
you
back,
want about
that's
it.
fine.
I'm looking for a process.
I'm gonna bring this back next,
That's how I would do it.
next, Joyce.
Would it be helpful if this document was sent to the entire board in a Word version?
Yes.
Because it's PDF'd on the board,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the Word docs.
But I've already retyped it, so.
And
Yeah.
I'm just asking if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I can send
Sure,
that and
thank
then
you.
Yeah,
you can
right,
direct what to do with that.
right.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful, because I think, as I look, I mean, if we remember what partially achieved meant, it meant that it needed attention. That was how it was defined. Needed attention
Right.
now is how it's defined. So there are some that I think are more important than the low scoring ones, like we
Yes.
ensure our standards are consistent with parent and
All right.
expectations. I'm just saying that's one I might like to see on the list and be able to check,
And-
as opposed to communicate with our legislature. I mean,
All right, and I already said you can bring that forward.
okay.
But
Okay.
let's do
So
it.
how are we gonna
Please
do that?
do
We're
that.
gonna have to send it to Joyce ahead of time or something.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to send it, I mean, we'll have this list next time. We'll vote on which of these are the priorities, and give everybody say on what the priorities are.
How
and
many we gonna
rank their
have?
priorities,
Yeah. how are
and
we
we'll
gonna
reach
vote?
an agreement.
Five.
So wait,
Pick
are
five.
Five
you
it
gonna
is.
put
One in each category?
everything up
Maybe.
here, or
Wherever you
just the low
However
score?
you want.
You,
How about we send
we'll
it,
bring everything up here, and you can prioritize anything you
What I
want.
want to do is, I want to be able to show the board. Let me give you another example.
No, hang on.
Peter,
We know
I
where you're going with this,
recognize,
Susan.
sorry, you're going to have to hold on. Recognize, and I have up to 7 minutes, but I won't take it if you quit arguing. So basically, if you look at, we've established clear strategies to accomplish our vision. Here's a perfect example of that, and we're not doing it. 6 people said it was only partially achieved. That is not on that list, being able to prioritize it. 85% of our group of 7 people said, oh my gosh, we're not there. So could I add those in blue?
10 minutes ago, I said you could. She'd asked it. I said she could. I'm saying you can
Okay.
again. And
Got
now I would like a motion to end debate.
I have a question.
Come on, we're just
Give me
repeating
10
this.
seconds.
We're repeating the same things over again, if it's a new topic.
Yeah. Why don't we send like our top 5 to Joyce, and that way we'll come here with them all prioritized, so we don't, that'll save us an hour and a half of debate.
Would you like to do that?
Yes, that's why I suggested a quality,
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds
an
good.
online version.
Sure, everybody send your top 5 to Joyce, please.
So things that aren't on the list can just be immediately eliminated.
Sure.
And that'll save us.
Everybody send your top 5 to Joyce, please.
And we'll only
Top
be here
five.
till 11:30 next
Yeah.
time, and that.
I was hoping to go to 5 parts of the room.
Jennifer?
I kind of like moving around.
May I clarify that these are the priorities for our next year or for our next 6 months?
Next
or
year.
The frame
Next
is a
This year,
year.
which we're
This
already
year.
halfway through. So.
Oh, wait,
We
whoa.
A
can
year-
commit till the end of our.
A year time frame.
That's kind of an ongoing process.
A year.
Yeah.
Truly, I mean, it matters to me what I
Yeah.
put at the top. Okay, that's the frame. Thank you.
Yes. All right, we know where we're going.
Until you have to run.
Thank you.
Oh.
Next,
Right
we
now.
have new business session and possible approval of administrative staff compensation for 2015, 2016. Would someone like to make a motion for approval of the compensation plan as presented?
Now that they're all gone, we can vote against them.
Please don't.
That's not funny.
It's been moved by
Sorry.
Carrie
Second.
and seconded. Discussion.
Call the
All
question?
all those in-
Actually,
all those-
yeah, my only question is related to, are we going back into close with the superintendent part, or?
No.
Is the only one I see?
We did not notice it that way, and we can, there's no rush on that.
Okay.
He's not on the superintendent's.
Well, there was information on the one sheet, but it
That's right.
says, okay.
That's right.
Okay, I just want to be clear what we're voting on. So-
Yeah, this is, right, this is just for the administrators excluding the superintendent. Right?
This
Yeah,
is-
that's what appears here, so that's what
Yeah.
I assumed.
This is the 2%?
Yes.
Okay.
Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Future agenda items, it's been listed as a work in process as we'll go on. I
Model
sort of-
UN is still not on there.
That's actually, there was some old,
This
sort of recognition stuff, which is out of date since the Model UN was students last year. And that I removed those as we go forward. We'll try and get everything with the recognitions, in the recognitions portions of the meeting. If there's something like that that comes up, we'll talk about it. Dean?
I would suggest we keep referendum planning on the front burner.
It is, the ones in yellow are ongoing.
I did not see a legend that identified.
Oh, okay, fine.
I thought maybe that was to eliminate them.
It says ongoing. Okay,
I can't read yellow letters with yellow.
sorry.
front door.
Yellow are the items that we have started and,
I can read it, don't.
and are ongoing so they will stay on the list, green items
We
that
should
are.
take a thumbs up or thumbs down if we should use different print with that highlighter color.
No, I refuse. And then there's items on the bottom of the list, or those are items that are up and coming. Some of them, as you can see, are scheduled. Some of them are not. Anything else we want to add to the list at this moment?
Yes, Model UN, it's not talked about recognition, it's about the program.
You want to talk about the program?
I would like
So
them to
last
come
year they
in.
had a prepared presentation, but
Yep.
this year you want
They
them to
do
just
have a
come and talk.
prepared
Well, but
presentation.
it's not the same kids anymore, that's all I'm saying.
They are, right.
Does anybody else would like to hear a Model UN presentation?
That's your role,
I would.
isn't it?
Sure.
I would.
I'd be interested in hearing it at some point, but it's not great. If they're
Under 10
If they're
minutes, they do
prepared
it
to
very
do it
fast.
and they don't have to create a whole new presentation because
All right.
kids aren't there.
I will talk to them and see if they're interested in doing they're interested in doing it this year. Okay, anything else? If we can move on to future meetings, item N, November 16th is the Healthcare Benefits Planning Committee. November 24th is the next school board meeting.
Tuesday.
That's right, sorry, that's a Tuesday before Thanksgiving. November 30th is the Personnel Committee. December 2nd is Policy. And then the December there's only one scheduled school board meeting in December right now, and it's December 16th.
And Dan, could we have the healthcare materials before the meeting and relevant glossary? get the materials before the meeting. I don't need the glossary. I'll spend the hour looking at all of
Okay. And that's the case. I would like a motion to adjourn.
So
Jennifer? She had her hand up first. You can second.
Second.
Thank you very
Somebody.
much. All in favor?
them. See you Saturday.
Hi,
Yeah.
Opposed?
I'm voting for